Yeah, that's true.
Brian's ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So I'll call the meeting to order. The date is Wednesday, April 12th, 2023, and this is a joint meeting between the three bodies, which is MSAD 51 and our North Yarmouth Select Board and associated folks, and our Cumberland Town Council. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll quickly go around the room because I'm told we should and introduce ourselves. So my name is Jason Record. I'm the board chair, one of the school board members.
Scott Poulin, I'm the Director of Finance, HR, and Operations for the school district.
Jeff Porter, Superintendent of the school district.
Andrea Berry, Select Board Member in North Yarmouth.
Diane Barnes, Town Manager, North Yarmouth.
I'm Brian Seitz. I'm the chair of the Select Board North Yarmouth.
Allison Foster, I'm the chair of the Cumberland Town Council.
Mark Segrist, Vice Chair of the Cumberland Town Council.
Bob Vale, Cumberland Town Council.
Ron Kopp, Cumberland Town Council.
Tig Hilson, Cumberland Town Council.
Bill Shane, Cumberland Town Manager
Helene DeBartolomeo, Finance Director for the town.
of Cumberland.
Ann Maximovich, Vice Chair of the School Board.
Tommy Leggett Barr, Junior Student Rep to the school board.
Christina Mitchell, School Committee, Cumberland.
Shirley Story King, Cumberland Town Council.
Jared Levin, Interim School Board Member.
Kim Vine, School Board Member.
Okay, thank you. And
Tom McGinnis, School Board Member from North Yarmouth.
very good. Thank you. All right. First item on the agenda is updates from our three finance chairs, which I guess we'll have MSAD 51 go first. So Tom, please.
Okay, so I'm speaking tonight. Vanessa Bryant, who is the board finance chair, is unfortunately unable to attend tonight's meeting. So I'm representing the finance committee. So before I pass it over to Jeff to go over some of the finer details of the budget, I'd like to take a few moments to speak on behalf of the finance committee. We've been meeting regularly since January to craft a budget that meets the sizable and varied needs of the school district while minimizing the burden on the taxpayers in our community. And first, I'd like to commend Jeff, Scott, and the rest of the district leadership team for their difficult and thoughtful conversations about the district's priorities and whether they should be funded in the proposed budget. I assure you that it was an extensive list of priorities that could not be advanced so that we could propose a budget that might be acceptable to our two towns. Though the budget includes a modest increase to advance the district's priorities, much of the budget increase can be attributed to rising costs and a broader inflationary environment, as well as the growing enrollment in our district. We believe that we have proposed a budget that prioritizes the needs of our students and staff while responsibly considering the impact on taxpayers. The Finance Committee has had extensive conversations about what to include and what not to include in the budget. I want to stress to the people in this room, as well as the general public, that we are available to answer any questions or address any concerns that you may have about the proposed budget. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Jeff now.
All right, thank you, Tom, and thank you to the Finance Committee for all their work, and to Scott Poulin, Finance Director, for all of his work in putting this proposed budget, which is still proposed right now. I do have some slides if it helps to follow along, just in kind of giving you an update as to where our budget is right now. Just starting with enrollment, projected enrollment, and in historical enrollment, going all the way back to 1967, which I know it's really tiny print at the bottom there, but it goes all the way back to the founding of the SAD in 1967. And you can see the enrollment back then was around 1,200 students or so. And there was a peak enrollment. If you were to see that number in the middle, 2000, 2001, that was the peak enrollment that hit around 2,400 students. And then there has been a decline in enrollment until about 2017, 18, 19, and now we've seen a fairly steady increase over the last 3, 4, 5 years, and we're going to see a projected increase based on the last 3 demographic and enrollment studies that we've had done in the district since 2016. So our projected enrollment is expected to surpass the peak enrollment of the SAD back in the early 2000s as we move forward through the rest of the decade. So that's the enrollment picture. These are the updated numbers for the budget for our proposed recommended budget that the board is considering right now. We have 11 lines of the budget that the state requires us to fall into. There's 10 here. The 11th one is other. We don't use other. And you'll notice that CTE, which is career and technical education, which is students that go to Paths, and we also have a couple students that go to Westbrook Vocational. The state directly pays for those services now. That was a law change a few years ago. However, they keep that line in our budget for some reason. They don't remove it. For regular instruction, we are up 8.22% over the current year, and we have a lot of different reasons for that. We have positions in there just for enrollment. For 7 years now, we've been adding positions to the budget just for enrollment. We have several positions supporting RTI, which is interventions for students, at several different schools, and this is in line with our strategic plan. There is a new math program in there. We have one that is expiring. The license is expiring, and every 6 years for this particular math program at the middle school, we are looking into a new program, and the middle school actually just selected one after piloting several. Permanent substitutes. Ever since the pandemic, we've had a hard time getting daily substitutes in our classrooms. So permanent substitutes are people that commit to us for 4 or 5 days a week, and in exchange we pay them a little bit more money than we pay daily subs. We've had really good reception from permanent subs, and we have around 12 right now in the district, and that's really helping out with staffing shortages in our schools. These are people we rely on every day, but much of those costs weren't actually in our budget. We've been using them. We've used contingency. We used other funds to staffing lines that were vacant in order to fund these. As we continue moving forward, we needed to budget some more money for those. There's a part-time school resource officer in this budget, and that person is to support the middle school and Wilson School. We also have a full-time position that's existing at the high school and has been used for the whole district, but we're proposing that we have an additional part-time SRO going forward. There's a new reading approach across the United States right now that is evidence-based, and we are buying a lot of materials for that program at the primary school level especially. We've added money for Pathways, which is not alternative education, but it's basically different experiences that students can apply for and get credit for. Those are exterior, usually outside experiences outside the district. We've been doing that for a number of years, but we're adding some money. And then there's a position called developmental specialist that we actually already have in the budget. We didn't budget for it, we needed it. And we went ahead and paid for it out of some vacant positions this year, but we need to put it in the budget going forward. In special education, we've been involved in changing the model, so it's up 9.96% for next year, and most of this is budget to actual expenses. Again, we have taken some of our educational technician positions, which have remained vacant all year long. We've not been able to find people to fill those positions, and we began filling them with professional level positions such as occupational therapists, social workers, speech language clinicians. We've actually filled 10 of those positions and reconfigured our model for special education behavior and functional life skills, so that it's more of a clinical wraparound model for students. And it's a better service model for kids, and we really expect that our students will be thriving with this model. It is expensive up front, and again, these people are in these positions now, and this is the model that we're going to go forward with. This also includes a net decrease for support staff that we're supporting those programs. We also have some additional costs for summer school, for special education. A lot of students during COVID that we did not have an in-person program in the summer. We've gone back to that, so we have additional costs for that. And some out-of-district special purpose placements. Other instruction, we have the boosters during COVID had a hard time raising money for additional assistant coaching positions. We've been trying to move all the coaching positions into the general fund for years and years. This is the last of it. So these are the coaching positions, and the boosters did ask us to consider doing that. Board's been supportive, so that is why the increase there of 13, largely due to that 13.19%. We have a decrease in student and staff support, and that's by looking at our existing leases that we have for technology. We have a lot of our technology devices that are on leases, and we try to, kind of like when you pay for a car, and then you try to smooth out your car payment over years, and you don't get a new car until your payment's going off. We do the same thing with technology, and we're paying off a lease early this year so that we can actually have a decrease in this area for next year's budget. System administration, which is the district administration, we have some increases in things that you're probably familiar with: liability insurance, legal costs. The board is also looking to hire a consultant to help with public engagement around the new school. So that line is up 8.65%. At the school administration, 4.16%. The schools have been engaged in a lot of strategic priorities around belonging, inclusion, a lot of activities, especially post-COVID, when we're really trying to do everything in person and bring a lot more events and activities back into the schools. School administration lines, we've put more money in. And again, all these lines also include salaries and benefits, projected salaries and benefits going forward as well. Transportation, just some increases in fuel costs. Facilities and maintenance, 12.43% increase. As you probably know, utility costs are up. We also have an additional custodial and maintenance position in the budget for next year. We are having more modular classrooms, and we need more custodial work and help in that area. And we're falling behind on maintenance because we're increasing our square footage, especially with the modulars that we continue to need. And then debt service, that is decreasing. That's a natural decrease based on the middle school and high school projects. And then also we've added in half of the revolving renovation funds for the Wilson School, which will be starting that project this summer. So the voters approved that last June, and there's half of it that we still have to pay 0% on the project, just the principal amount, no interest, and then half of that project is given to us basically free of charge. So thank you to the voters. So our expenditures are up 7.40% over the current year, and I have to say it's the highest since I've been here in terms of an expenditure side, and we'll show you the tax side in just a moment. Just to unpack the 7.4%, fixed costs out of the 7.4%, 4.6% of that is existing salaries and benefits, debt service, utilities, operations, inflation. All of that is the bulk of that increase, and we're just seeing more of it, as you've probably seen with utilities and things just costing more, the inflation that we're seeing in our economic picture right now. 2.1% of the 7.4% are the strategic priorities, many of those things that I just mentioned as I was going through that last slide. And then the other part of those things that I mentioned is 0.7% are changing conditions around enrollment. Now, that's not the whole story around enrollment, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. This is our revenue picture. Thankfully, our state subsidy outlook is much healthier this year. We're up about just under 1.7 million. Most of that is from the state subsidy increase to our district. And so we're up 12.93% in revenue, anticipated revenue, which is, again, just under 1.7 million more dollars in revenue, and that certainly will help on the tax, for the tax effect, and we'll explain that. I thought this slide was really important. I presented this to the board a couple of weeks ago. These are the temporary space expenses, whether it's coming out of our general fund or it's coming out of what will become capital reserves. We have money in unallocated fund balance that we are planning to transfer over to capital reserves in order to help offset the cost of temporary space during the next 12 months. So I mixed together the general fund and the capital reserves in this one slide just to show you the total amount of money that we plan to be spending, that we need to spend on temporary space, which is modulars. So 1.4 million, just a little over $1.4 million. And again, this is not coming from the general fund. This is coming from unallocated fund balance that will go to capital reserves to purchase and lease, not purchase, to lease a second modular unit, which will be a 12-room unit at Mabel I. Wilson School, removing the 2 smaller units that are there, moving and rebuilding the playground, Tuttletown, and resurfacing and cleaning up the entire play space outdoors. It will be about 1.4 million. And again, this is just for fiscal year 24. Out of the general fund related to temporary space, we're putting in $40,000 for new furniture for that additional 12-room unit. Also out of the general fund for this coming fiscal year, $250,000 for that new 12-room unit. That's the lease amount, the additional lease amount. And then we have a current annual temporary space lease that is existing and continuing, and that is $337,000, which will be in the next fiscal year as well going forward. It's in the existing budget, and that is all of our modular units that we currently have at Mabel Wilson and GMS. And that will be just over $2 million that we'll be spending in the next 12 months. We have a phase 2 that's already been approved by the school, by the board of directors, which involves adding an additional unit, 12-room unit at Greeley Middle School, which is about to take off with enrollment, projected enrollment. We're going to see about 250 students come through that school in the next 5 years, and we need another unit to prepare for it. So again, this is not even including phase 2. This is just phase 1 for the next 12 months. The Cumberland tax effect, at this point, I want to thank both towns for really working hard with us on identifying these numbers. I know it's hard to get to this point where we can, towns can give us an actual number. Right now, we're at 61 cents on the mill, or 2.87% increase on the taxes. So going from a 7.40 expenditure increase on the expenditure side to a 2.87% tax effect on the Cumberland side is really amazing. And again, thank you to the town for helping to support that. And I know there's similar news coming from North Yarmouth, and I'll let Diane talk about that because we didn't have that updated in time for this slide.
So I'm basing my estimate on no new value at this time, and that's about 47 cents on the dollar. And I do know that I'm going to have at least 15 million in new value, but I don't know how much of that will be in the TIF district. So I don't want to come out with any numbers yet, but I feel the worst case scenario on the North Yarmouth side is 47 cents just related to the school budget alone.
That's awesome. Great. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you to both towns. Really is hard work, I know, to get to this point. We just really appreciate the collaboration between the SAD and both towns. So good news on both fronts for the tax side of it. And just to give you a quick history of the expenditure and taxes, I had mentioned this is the largest expenditure increase that we've had in a decade. And as you can look at all those numbers on the second column from the left, going all the way down, they're much smaller than this year. This has just been a year that we have, a lot of the enrollment has caught up with us. A lot of the positions that we had put on hold during the pandemic have caught up with us. We've had a lot of needs that have caught up, and this was a year that we really needed to do that, including inflation and all those things factored in. So a little bit larger increase on the expenditure side, but on the tax side, you can see that we're, really right there with other years. We've had anywhere from, over the last decade, 0% tax effect, a little bit over 1% tax effect, so up to 4% on the tax, or 5%. So over the last decade, just kind of giving you where does this all fall and where does this fit this year in terms of the budget. So thank you again to the towns for that. And just comparing, we're always asked, okay, to show us what Yarmouth, Falmouth, and Cape Elizabeth, those are the three communities that we're always being asked about. And there's two ways of looking at per pupil cost. One is to not include revenue and just do a gross calculation of per pupil cost, or raw calculation. And you can see that our per pupil cost projected for next year is $21,860 per student. Yarmouth, again, this is not adjusted for revenue, is $21,912 per student. Falmouth is $22,784, and Cape Elizabeth is $22,979. So even without revenue added in, we're the lowest of the four that we usually get compared to. And then if you look at the revenue, and we are actually the very high receiving compared to the other three districts in terms of especially state allocation for schools. The adjusted per pupil, when you look at the revenue and consider that, and then look at the tax assessment to the communities, our district is $14,985 with the revenue adjustment. In Yarmouth, it's $17,646. Falmouth, $16,520. And Cape Elizabeth is $20,560. And a lot of that has to do, again, with, well, all of it has to do with, they're not high receiving districts in terms of state subsidy. We really are. We're almost double in some cases. So that helps us out a lot on the tax end of things, or the per pupil end of things. And just this is another way of doing it. It's just a visual, exactly what I just showed you, but showing you just the per pupil costs and a visual where our district is. And again, we get asked this question every year, so I like to see it. Sometimes Yarmouth is a little bit lower than us. I think maybe last year they might have been a little bit lower. This year they're higher. It really depends on the year, but we're generally right there in the hunt. So these are clickable links, and we'll put this presentation up along with all the other materials on our website. But we have detailed budget lines, every line of the budget, every account line in the budget, all the cost centers, other summaries of working budget, and then the proposed, the full presentation. This is only a partial part of the budget presentation that was given in March to the school board, is also on our website. The next steps for the budget on our end are on the 24th of this month. The board is holding a public hearing on the proposed budget, and then a week later on the 1st of May, the board votes to whether or not they wish to adopt this budget as it is or not, or make changes. On Thursday, May 18th, is the annual district budget meeting at the Arts Center. And then finally, of course, the referendum on June 13th. And that's the budget wrap up, and Tom will take all of your questions.
Do you want to take questions from the boards before we move on to the towns?
Jason, just back to the slide on your modulars per year. That was 2.1.
Yep, so that's a little over 2 million, 2,050,000.
That's every year
No, that's just for the next 12 months.
for the next 12
12 months, and everything's factored in, whether it's existing, we pay 337 right now, and just existing leases, so that's factored in, that will continue next year, and then all the new costs that will be in there as well.
Okay, thank you.
So that alone is $25 million of debt that we could have leveraged if we had a positive vote. $25 million of debt that we could have leveraged against those $2 million in portable rentals. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's
I
sunk
think the
cost.
information that slide shows me is that we have to get a strong message out to the public that this isn't gonna get cheaper.
And that's why I asked you to bring the slide back up. I mean, that, to me, that's your best sales pitch that you could come up with right there. I mean,
It's crazy what we're gonna have to do, and we're talking, what, gosh, 3 years, 4 years if we're lucky, to open the doors again for a new school?
For a new
5?
school, probably 4 or 5, yeah. Yeah, so all of this is really based on a 5-year plan that the board approved a few weeks ago, which is a 5-year short-term facilities plan to get us through 5 years, hoping that there's a new school on the horizon.
The other thing that it does, Bill, is you and I have talked about, it does take away our ability to step that debt over time, because we're having to use our unallocated fund balance, which we wanted to apply towards debt, to soften the debt, that it takes that ability away at this point, so. Because we will depleted our, what we could have carried towards that debt.
Holy cow. I mean, that just makes my heart hurt. I mean,
So our $5 million reserve that we had, we're really chewing into that to the next 2 summers. And this summer, it looks like that. Next summer is going to be similar, and then it gets better. But still, these are all sunk costs that we're not really getting anything out of in the long term.
I was not surprised, but I was thinking it was a little lower, and then we put all the numbers in one place and said, this is what it's actually going to cost for the next year for temporary space. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot of money.
And then we don't even put the mental wellness of our teachers and staff and everybody else on such a crowded facility that you can't even factor that cost in. I don't
Right.
know, we're gonna be paying for that for a decade.
Right.
It's also probably worth mentioning that all of these extra students who are at Mabel L. Wilson right now will soon be at the middle school, and we'll have to accommodate them there as well.
One of the things that concerns me is, I looked at the graph there, and student population, my son and daughter were here in 2001, and there was a sea of portables here. I'm interested in the staffing at that level in 2001 versus the staffing of 2023. Obviously, we do some things a little bit differently, but if there is a huge difference in staffing between 2001 and 2023, I think that there should be a re-examination of what we do. I'm not going to pass this out as criticism, but certainly there should be an explanation behind that. I know on the town side, if you look at staffing over the last 20 years, staffing has gone up, but it's, I think it's directly proportional to the increase in population. I would like to think that staffing went down with population and came back up, and that if I was looking at the 2001 versus the 2023, they wouldn't be way out of whack.
Yeah, I'm sure we can get that information, Bob. There was, and Scott can talk about this more, this was just before I got here. Back in 2010, there was a major staffing adjustment downward. There was, I don't remember how many positions, 25 to 30 positions were removed from the budget during that time. But if you remember that, Scott.
Yeah, I was part of that. It was when, of course, the economy went down, right? Everybody remembers 08, 09, and we did have quite a riffing of staff that we had to do at that time. Yep.
So what you're talking about, Bob, is sort of like staff per pupil, almost, and pupils per classroom. So they're looking at that over time.
Yeah. Because I think, if I look at the number of portables that we had in 2001 versus what we have in portables today, with basically the same population, there's a lot more portables.
Well, we also have 4 buildings. We had more than 3 buildings, right? In 2001, we had NYMS. So we didn't need as many portables.
I think those are interesting things to put out to the public. What's our total classrooms? And that benchmark of 2001 versus today is,
But it's apples and oranges, Bob. I mean, you're talking almost 2 decades, and how much has changed that they have to do, that the state has mandated?
What I'm
that
pointing out
added
is it might be helpful to see what it is that we do differently.
Absolutely, it would be helpful to see, these are the changes along the way that added people that required, that they had no choice to do. So when I look at my kids are your kids' age, they loved the portables back here because that's where they belonged, in the portables. They weren't allowed in the good stuff and the good furniture inside. But
In the high school, right behind the junior
oh
high.
my gosh, it was crazy back here. And the best thing we did was rip off that 60s wing. Oh, that was scary. But for me, I just think the best message we can send is a clear and concise message, and we need people with expertise. We can't do it just by committee. We can't do it as trying to fill in and help. Honestly, I think we need a marketing consultant that basically every time a negative email goes up or a negative post goes up on a site, a positive one follows, just basically counters that with real factual information, because when people are fed just the negative message all the time, they don't understand what the real problems are. And we've got some real issues here. And when I look at, we could have leveraged $25 million toward what that cost of that school would have done by having none of these portables. I'm just like, I'm just astounded. So I think the strategy moving forward, and I know we're jumping ahead on the agenda, and I apologize, Jason, but I think we as a team collectively have to get together and understand what this means to our community, because we had 3 campuses before. We're into 1 campus now, and we're less 2 buildings. So I think the math is easy to look at, and I think we've got to get a clear and concise message and tell people the why. I think they will understand, and I think we'll be successful. But man, oh man, I wish everybody in the community could sit down in a meeting like this and just hear some of this stuff. I'm blown away. I really am. So
I would jump in and add that same thing. Some people question the consultant cost we have in there for communication, and we did our darndest, but it's you just chase every Facebook comment down, and so we need not only perhaps professional assistance in communicating, but also we need the voice of the boards to really help us in any way you can, for the reporters, for anything you can do to help us, because I think we need a new school fast.
I have a question. In your projected enrollments, and this is just because I keep running up to, not people opposed, but people fearful, fearful of the unknown. How reliable do you think those projections are? I mean, you don't have to drive around town very much to see how much. I guess my question is, was development included in the projections? And if so, to what extent? Or was it mostly turnover? Or I guess I would like, especially from our work on the town, a better idea of where those enrollment projections sit to date.
Yep. So the last time the enrollment study was done was in March of 2022. So it's been about a year. And those numbers, they've been done in 2016, 2019, and then a year ago. Has been the 3 reports. And all 3 reports, we followed those numbers after the report, and they were accurate with the student enrollment growth. There was an adjustment for COVID, and the person who did the reports, all 3 of them, told us that there would be an adjustment for COVID, but we have bounced back out of that adjustment much quicker than she thought. And so we're almost right back on track where we were before in terms of increase.
So you mentioned the evil C word that we're not allowed to mention at Cumberland Town Council, but I'm wondering if COVID is now making us a more desirable community, and are those numbers still accurate, or are we looking at more people who live in urban areas that are looking for more suburban or even rural areas? Are those numbers accurate going forward? Because I'm not seeing it I see pressure for more development.
Well, and I think anything that's been in the works over even the last year or so is not reflected in the numbers that we have. So I know the board had mentioned at one point they thought when we did our last report that they would want to update this sooner than later, and almost get another update within 18 months to 2 years, is what I last remember us talking about, because development continues. But Rebecca Wandell, who did all 3 reports, did look at turnover housing, and she looked at all existing development and projected that she knew at the time that she did the report. Okay. And her numbers, again, from all 3 reports have been very accurate. They've been very close.
Okay.
Yep.
I think it's important to point out on this topic that the enrollment study is not all speculation. I mean, we have a bubble of kids that are already at MIW and will be moving up through the ranks. So the question is, do we think that the kindergarten enrollment coming in is going to shrink? And I don't believe that's the case. And to your point about COVID, I think we're not going to see the same cyclical nature that we've seen in the past, I don't believe. I think the cat's out of the bag, sort of, that Maine is a wonderful and safe place to be, and the internet, you can telecommute. So I don't think things are going to go back in the other direction. But it's not purely speculation. That wave already exists, and it's going to come through and continue to grow. Mark?
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to follow up a little bit on that question, you mentioned that turnover and development were both kind of baked into that analysis. I just wanted to confirm. So how is that done? I mean, are they pulling numbers from towns and saying, hey, for the last 5 years, this is the number of permits that we issued, this is the number of units that we built? Okay.
Yep.
I just want to make sure, because that's one of the things that I think is a concern for many folks, understandably in the community, is are we sitting around talking about this? You know, if the town of Cumberland has a plan to do something, are we communicating that to the school board? Are you baking that information in your numbers into projections so we can plan accordingly? Right? I think it's a concern that folks have that maybe our right hand isn't talking to the left, and so I'm happy.
Yeah,
to do
she
that.
did all of her homework on that, and when she did her presentation to the board a year ago, she explained to the board all those factors she looked at. So she looked at permits that were pulled, she looked at home sales, and then she looked at all the projected numbers based on those two things. And so there is a huge report, if you're interested, that's on our website, and she outlines all the things that she did when she was looking at it. And she used to work for Planning Decisions years ago, and that was a joint report that the town and the school district also did back in 2016. So she's also been involved in reports for the municipal side.
In 2019, there was also the GP COG study, which was very, very insightful and spent a lot of time in the final report talking about the turnover in housing and how that contributed significantly. And really, the punchline to that was that the building permits really were not a huge factor at that time.
Yeah, all of it was turnover. I mean, the turnover in housing that we saw during COVID, where people were cashing out the big money, 30% of those were from out of state. So people were migrating to the state for, you know, the quality of life and the school district we have here. So that wasn't a surprise. But when we look at those numbers back in 2001 that Bob was talking about earlier, I think if you look at the data that we did in the town, there were almost every other home had a child in it that was an SAD student. The last study that we did a few years ago went all the way down to 1 in 4 households had a child in it. And I think we're creeping back up to maybe 1 in 3, but we're not back up to 1 in every other house. So I think we want to be careful. We don't want to overproject and overbuild, but we also at the same time don't want to underbuild and then just keep adding additions all the time. So I applaud you guys for doing what you're doing. Sometimes it's throwing a dart at the wall, but you do have a lot of data that you have access to with just your school bus stops and households per child and all that stuff, and that's probably the most accurate data. And then we can just tell you that we've got this subdivision or that subdivision on the books, and we're just guessing it's, you know, 12 kids, 20 kids, 50 kids. We don't know. There's nothing that says, you know, each household can have a quota of children. It doesn't work that way. So it's truly a best guess. And I think this consultant that you've used lately, I mean, three times in a row, she was almost to the number. So that was pretty amazing and impressive.
Yeah, that's what we found. And I mean, just to give you an idea, we've had probably for 8 to 10 years, there was about 130, 140 students in each of our kindergarten classes coming in. And in the last 3-4 years, we've had anywhere from 170 to 200 students in our kindergarten classes. So we've been pretty consistent. So, and that is expected to continue and actually go over 200 based on Rebecca's projections. So if that continues and we're losing small classes only at the high school. Our high school is the smallest right now, and that's exactly where those numbers are. All of our big classes are at the elementary level and now moving into middle school. And all of our smallest classes in the district are at the high school, and they'll be gone. So we're looking at a very different picture as we move forward.
Hopefully an easy question. Scott, do you have, I know you mentioned, and not stealing Mark's thunder, but clearly salary and benefits is a big chunk of our increase too. Do you have a kind of a breakout of just your average salary increase excluding new positions? Because obviously I know you're adding positions too, so that would be noise.
Yeah, I mean, I can put that together. I don't have it with me this evening,
that would be
but certainly
great.
a document that I can run
Okay.
and present that information, so.
Awesome, thank
Yeah,
you.
we can put that together.
Did you have something, Brian?
No, Mark asked it and made it sound much more intelligent, so I'm just gonna leave it.
Does that to us a lot, too.
Yeah.
All right, so that was our budget. We'll get back to the agenda a little bit. We will do more on the new school, but do we want to move on? Who wants to go first on their town update?
Doesn't matter.
Rock, paper, scissors.
After you, please.
Okay. So we don't have a fancy PowerPoint, but we thought since this was my last meeting that we would, instead of like throw a bunch of numbers and images up there, that Diane and I would do an interpretive dance that really expresses the complexity. No, kidding. So it's just, she's glaring. Okay.
Diane's gonna miss you so much.
So I'm just gonna run through some of the top line stuff with our budget. It's pretty straightforward this year, just to give everybody an idea where we are. We're in the process. We have a little bit of a different process in North Yarmouth where the town manager puts the budget together. She presents that budget to the select board as well as a budget committee, which is a group of elected members in the community. We both review it separately, come to sometimes separate conclusions, and those get put before the town meeting this year, which is on June 13th. 17th. 17th? Okay. So anyway, I got that wrong. So let's see what else I can screw up in this one. So that's where we are right now. Is we're about 2 weeks into that review process. The select board will then come out of a workshop on this, make some changes or suggested changes. Budget committee will do the same. That will get put on the warrant, and then we'll talk about it with the town in June. So right now we're looking at what the town manager's proposed for the FY24 budget is a budget of $4,437,000. Which is about a 18% increase, $700,000 increase over the FY23 budget. There's some main drivers in that. They're impacting some large drivers in that. One of the things, not a huge one, but is we're proposing adding some positions this year. One, a full-time position in the fire, as well as making some changes to personnel and benefits as well. That's going to impact the budgets, but the main things are capital expenses and increases in solid waste, which are, I think, going to impact Cumberland here next year as well. So those are the big drivers, and what that looks like for us is, on the capital expenses side, it's things like replacing the roof at the fire department and putting in an exhaust system. It's road maintenance and paving and those kinds of things, and that totals about 43% of that increase, almost 44% of that increase. But the other big driver is this Casella contract. I mean, we're going to see an increase of about $82,000 a year right off the bat with Casella next year. And we'll have to purchase the totes coming out the first year. So that's about $250,000 there, or another 36-ish% increase, or 36% of that increase that we're looking at overall. So between the capital expenditures and the Casella contract, those are really the main drivers in our budget this year for the increases. But other than that, it's all pretty straightforward. I think Diane has. We're looking at a 6% COLA increase across the board for staff, and like I mentioned, we have just a couple staff positions that we're thinking of adding. But otherwise, our budget's pretty straightforward, and I think Diane's done a really good job in a tough budget year, coming up with some good numbers. And there's going to be a lot of this is all might change as we go through the process, because we like to be exciting over in North Yarmouth, keep people guessing. So we'll see how it all ends up at the end of April.
Just read Facebook. You'll get all your answers.
Right. And I would suggest that if people are reading Facebook, that they actually reach out to us.
Right, and get the real information.
I'm always shocked at the amount of information that people look for on Facebook, and the lack of emails that I receive to get actual answers and responses on what's happening with the budget in our community with other issues. So I highly encourage you to reach out to your elected officials, because that's what we're there for.
So just to touch on the solid waste part, North Yarmouth and Wyndham and Falmouth have gone out together to solicit bids for toters, because our contracts were all up in the same year, and we're all scheduled to go to the automated service in November. So in another week or two, I'll have an idea of what that is going to cost. And I think my budgetary figure is high, but I have no way of knowing what they're going to come in at. And quite honestly, to figure out how many toters to buy because you have to get 2 per household, one for recycling and one for the regular trash, and it's like, how many are gonna wanna have a 32 gallon? How many are gonna want a 64? I mean, it's an unknown, so I just guessed at it. I may have too many of one, not enough of one, but at the end of the day, I'll have a figure and I can share that with Bill, so he'll have some idea of what's gonna happen next year or the year after for Cumberland. Next year, so you'll have some idea what it's gonna cost. And we're looking, we have the paper bag program too. And I reduced my revenue on the revenue side for that because there's no way we're gonna be able to police that going forward. So, the first 6 months, we'll still have it in place, but the last 6 months, it'll be on an honor system if people wanna continue to buy bags, but I don't think the town should invest in bags that people aren't gonna buy either, so.
Questions of North Yarmouth? Ann, please.
I just had a question thinking about the Casella totes. I don't know if that's something that, like, especially since it will be affecting Cumberland down the line too, if it's reasonable or not to buy every household the smaller one, but if people wanted a bigger one that they could pay to, I mean, I guess, I don't know, I'd have to maybe see them, but just kind of thinking off the top of my head here if that's.
The general size is the 64 gallon container
Oh, okay.
or higher. Plus, there's a recycling partnership grant that you can apply for. And we've applied for it, and we're going to be talking to that program developer tomorrow. But you have to have a 64 gallon or higher for the recycling in order to get that grant.
Okay.
So, and most households, I think, are going to want the 64 because the 32 is not large. And also, when they come and pick it up, I just can't envision the 32 gallon that's going to be as easy as a 64. And if something's going to get into the truck, or if the top's I don't know. I've heard some horror stories about that, but I also recognize that the elderly aren't going to be able to deal with a 64 gallon. So we did get a fair amount of the smaller ones, but we'll see how that all works out.
I guess one last thing, separate topic, is, obviously thinking about how each of our entities do have issues with communication and perhaps getting messages out to residents. I'm wondering if maybe it's something worth considering cost sharing a communications provider to try and handle many of these big things that the towns are dealing with, whether it's with the affordable housing coming up in Cumberland or these other changes in North Yarmouth. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Diane, is the general idea of the new program that the trash and the recycling is emptied once a week?
Yes. Same schedule that we're on right now.
Yep. 64 gallons of recycling in a week seems like a lot.
So what I've been told is, even though we have the pay per bag, when you provide them with a larger tote or a large container like that, this is what the recycling program people are telling me, that people tend to recycle more. You're going to get more recycling done in your community. So we'll see.
Okay.
If you make it convenient for them, so they have one big container to throw everything in versus the smaller ones you're seeing on the side of the road now.
Thank you. Other questions for North Yarmouth? Okay. Cumberland, please.
Mark.
Mark.
Yeah,
All right.
sure.
Very
Thank
good.
you very much. Our report's going to be somewhat similar to North Yarmouth's. We are right in the middle of our budget workshop season right now. We've had 2 budget workshops that are usually about 2 hours long. They occur right before our town council meeting, so it makes for a long evening, but a very productive one. And so what we've been doing is really taking our budget from last year, line by line, all the different departments, from administration to rec to fire and EMS, and going line by line and figuring out what the percentage increase is from last year. We really want to focus on those big expenses and the big increases to make sure we're focusing our resources and our energy in the right area. So what we found so far is that next year we're anticipating about a 10% increase in our expenses but at the same time, that's going to be offset slightly by a 21% increase in additional revenues for the town. So the net comes out somewhere in the middle there. But we're looking at a $13.8 million budget for the town. And in terms of mill rate increase, that's looking at like about 33 cents in addition to the mill rate, which is about, excuse me, 31% of the total mill rate increase, or 1.54% of the total estimated, I think 4.95%, which includes the county and the school as well. So what we're seeing in terms of our budget is, I think, a similar story that a lot of folks are seeing. Inflationary pressures on pretty much everything in the economy. That could be wages, that could be salaries, that could be the cost of fuel, that could be the cost of fertilizer, or anything that we use in terms of running the town. But we are seeing, like I mentioned, a relatively small increase on the mill rate. It's less than 2%. It's about 1.5%. So we feel like that's a pretty responsible budget so far. We've got 2 meetings left. We have one on the 24th before the town council meeting. We have one on Saturday, which is a Saturday morning meeting on the 27th. And we've also, you know, Jeff, I liked what you did in terms of the benchmark where you stood as an MSAD in comparison to Cape and Yarmouth and these other nearby towns. We've also done a similar analysis in Cumberland, finding that we spend about, I think in terms of our budget, about $1,700 per resident. And that falls, oddly enough, smack dab right in the middle among all the other neighboring communities that we have. So that's something I think, you know, you talk about getting information out there. I think that's a great thing that we can get out into the community there. Our big increases are going to be in the areas of wages, salaries, and benefits. We've also had some increases in terms of insurance premiums, workers' compensation premiums going up. A lot of the wage and salary increases, I'm sure MSAD and others are familiar with this, are union negotiations. And so that's where we're feeling some of the biggest changes in terms of our budget year over year. So that's all I have, unless others had a question. Bill, did you have anything to add, by the way?
Just that, similar to Diane's tale of woe, we will be having the same tale next year with solid waste. Our toters, we're estimating it'll be a $200 per stop, or about $660,000 in costs just for the toters. And South Portland did something interesting. They basically knew they were going to lose the revenues on their bags. Our bag revenues are almost $400,000 a year. So they basically charged the residents for the toters and eliminated the bag program, and it was well received. So those are the types of options we're kind of throwing out there, and it's going to be difficult. We may look at maybe even longer contracts than 5 years. It might be 7 or 10 years, and maybe even include the toters in those costs. So it's just, we're going to be working on that over the summer, because the other thing is we have to give the vendor almost a year's notice if we're going to, you know, set up this program here. I think it's a challenging year. It took us over a year and a half to come to full staff at our police department. It took us over a year to finally fund our 8th paramedic position. You know, you can go out and try to get these people, you can budget for them, but it's very, very difficult right now. So our public safety it's been a huge challenge. Our unions have been great to work with. They've really done a great job working with the town directly, but man, it's hard, and it really burns people out when they get forced to work overtime day after day after month, and you just can't sustain that. So the mental wellness of our employees is important to us. We do a lot there, and we are really happy we're finally to full staff, but we don't know what's next, because everyone is competing for the same employee pool right now. So someone up the road is offering $1.50 more, we're losing employees almost immediately. I just, you know, and you get to a point where you just can't compete. You just can't keep throwing money at the problem, because it doesn't stop. So we've been fortunate. We have a good core of employees, and they've been extremely loyal to the community. And we rely a lot on mutual aid. We do a lot with Diane and her team. They are very helpful anytime we need help on an issue or whatever it is. They're willing. It goes both ways. We borrow equipment all the time. We try to do whatever we can to try to save money, and that'll continue. Same thing with Scott and I. We do a lot of cost sharing with employees just on different services, so that he doesn't have to go out and buy specialty equipment when we have it. So that'll continue. It has been a work that we've done for 20 years plus, and I'm pretty proud of that. And I think we don't celebrate some of those things very often. And I think we should be talking a lot more about the things we have been doing successfully, and sharing on some of the concerns we have, because they are real. And I think most people in our communities have had those same type of issues at their own employment. So it's not just Cumberland, it's Yarmouth, it's Falmouth, it's everywhere around us. But it's real, and the quicker we can get through some of this, and I don't know when that is, but it is a challenge. And we're just fortunate we have really good neighbors all the way around us. So no matter what the emergency, I can count on picking up the phone, and 4 different communities would respond almost instantly. So we're very blessed that we're here in this location and we have the connections we do. And I think that saves our communities a lot of money that's never really monetized, that we don't see every day. So sorry for the speech, but I think it's important that when you hear it as well. And I know a lot of you already know that. So.
Ann?
Just one question. I know that, especially Bob, you've spoken to your desire for regionalization. I don't know if there's been any discussions between Cumberland and North Yarmouth recently about if we could merge our police and fire services.
Well, North Yarmouth doesn't have.
Well, I know they work with the sheriff's department, but if
I think those are conversations that need to happen, and in the broader conversation is to include Yarmouth and Falmouth. It's regionalization is, if you really want to get the best bang for your buck, and if you look at a pool of, we had a fly car some years ago, which was very effective tool where Bill can probably explain it a lot better than I can, but if you went back to a system like that for fire and rescue, and you kept your staff in a central location, but with purchasing and when you look at investments in infrastructure, it makes sense to do it over a multi-community. The same thing with education. It's we're not doing a lot different than we do in Yarmouth and Falmouth, and there's Governor Baldacci tried that some years ago, and he had a great idea. The actual way it played out was not so great. You could see how many communities actually joined together, and there wasn't many.
And I will say on the regionalization thing, because I do get asked that question quite a bit, and people look at it as this panacea. Well, we'll just shut down some fire stations and get rid of the equipment and save on staff. And the reality is, you still have to cover the same territory. You still have to service the same amount of people. So, what people think regionalization is and what regionalization will actually be at the end of the day, I mean, really, I think where you're going to get the most benefit is what Bob's referring to, that, when the economies of scale you're getting by going and buying equipment as a larger group. There's going to be things like that, but, I think it's fantasy to think that we're going to just shut down a bunch of firehouses and cover the same territory. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah. It's not what I was getting at either, but I appreciate that point, because, yeah.
And I'll say one of the things that, I can only speak to North Yarmouth's fire department, but I know that we are deeply involved in mutual aid as a critical way, and I believe that Cumberland is as well. And so while it's not a top-down type of regionalization per se, what that is, we might have one piece of equipment that Cumberland doesn't have, and when Cumberland needs it, we send someone, and vice versa with Yarmouth and a number of other places. And so the process is happening in that kind of way, even if it's not happening in a close down a fire station so that we can consolidate in that kind of way. There's also other regionalization efforts that are happening on a much wider scale, not just between our two towns, that I believe both towns are participating in. And a lot of that right now is information gathering in order to have thoughtful conversations about this. And so it is moving. It's as you can imagine, things move slowly even with two towns and a school. you know, as we.
We have together, Diane, is your chief full-time? You're a fire chief? Okay, so one full-time firefighter right now.
Yep.
We have 8, 9, we have 10 total. So that's, between the two of us, we have 11. Would everybody agree to that? 33 in Falmouth. 33. So when you look at the comparison of services and just those two very simple things, it doesn't work. We tried, Shirley, what, for 8 years in the beginning? And for 8 years, all our towns met, and all we could agree on is that we should do a dispatch study that we got a $30,000 grant for, and nobody participated except for us. We went to the county and we saved $100,000 a year in dispatch costs. Everybody else stayed the same for years. So we get to the table. We're the first one at the table. We're the first one to say we're willing to dance. We have usually 4 dance partners or 5. And then by the time we get through the point of people saying, okay, now we need you to commit. And remember, many of you weren't in this room, Shirley was, when we did the school consolidation vote. 70% of the town of Cumberland and North Yarmouth voted for a consolidation of the school district with Falmouth. 70% in Falmouth voted against this consolidation of the school district with SAD 51. I'm just saying we're number 1, but just, you know, kind of sucks to be Falmouth. But anyway, I'm just saying, man, oh man, every time I hear the word, it's PTSD for me, because it truly is something that we have tried as a community, and as communities, both of us sit at these tables and at these meetings, and we at the end of the meeting, there's nobody left. So we're doing the best we can with the resources we have. We try to find solutions for consolidations, for joint bidding processes, and all the things. The low-hanging fruit has totally been picked. It's the next level, and I honestly believe, and I've been in municipal government for over 35 years, I honestly believe it will have to be mandated by the state before it happens. Because it's always up to, well, you're not going to provide it as well as we can do it now by ourselves. And, you know, the crazy thing, I offered Falmouth the ability to do all their front counter services, all your dog registrations, car registrations, all that stuff. And I was going to charge them $60,000. And if you think about that and you go into town hall, you go, wow, that's a pretty good deal. Oh, no, we could do it cheaper. At that point, you throw up your hands. And the ironic thing is, during COVID, they called us between the weeks of Christmas and New Year's, and we did all of their car registrations, all their tax collections, because their whole staff was out with COVID. So we did it. We didn't charge them a dime. We sent all the money back over to them. And we can show you we are capable of doing it. We have some very talented people in our organizations, both organizations. And it's been an absolute pleasure working with Diane. It is probably one of the best managers I've worked with in North Yarmouth, honestly, in 20 years. So it's been a real pleasure. We work well together. We share information. I don't have to wait 3 weeks for a phone call back or any of that stuff. So it's really working well between our communities anyway and our staffs, because we actually know each other, and it's been kind of cool to see. So
I want to just quickly follow up on Bill's comment there. One of the other things that I do is I'm on the county budget committee, and a lot of the conversations over the last 2 years have been with the county manager and the sheriff and some of the other people, is consolidation of services. So I think the reality is, as Bill says, it's not going to happen at the local level. It has to come from a different entity, and I'm hoping that the county will show some backbone and start to make that process work.
Yeah, I mean, this board probably doesn't know, but Jeff, you remember, we proved in our district that it can work. We used to do the accounting, payroll, and all of the functions for Eustis and Andover. You remember that, Bob? So we couldn't consolidate with those around us because they didn't want to play ball with us. But we were able to bring in 2 other towns, and we're able to do that and showed that it can work. So, and we did that sometime, you know, probably, I don't know, it must be about 10 years ago we were doing that here, so.
And I was just gonna also just remind or throw out something that our chief submitted for a grant and got the grant. We have the funding for the position for a social work or mental health kind of regional position, and we haven't been able to fill it. And so just kind of back to the same of being able to fill these positions. I also think there's a real challenge, right? And people are intimidated from having to cover kind of relatively large geographies. And so it does kind of come to that. You think it means like, oh, it's centralization, and it's still complicated, and you're still covering and serving these other communities. So I think there's also that reality of finding folks that are willing to kind of take on these broader scope roles and having to adjust to different communities and making sure you feel like you're embedded and tied to them, and being able to represent appropriately. But if you know anyone looking for a physician, I think it'd be an amazing add to our communities. So, but we're trying.
Is there somebody over here? No. Okay.
I have a question, if that's all right. So I just want to go back to one of the things, Bill, that you mentioned about additional cost sharing that Cumberland is doing with the MSAD. And I didn't know, and that's really a question for both Scott and Bill, are those things that are happening outside of the police department partnership that are cost sharing options that we should also be considering in North Yarmouth? You know, are there things that are happening that we might be able to take advantage of as well, or that we might be able to lend as a town?
You may have to plow a school
Well,
in North
I think
Yarmouth.
there's always, I mean, there's always opportunity for that, especially if we end up with a new school in North Yarmouth. Great, correct. There's obviously opportunities for that. One of the things here is the geographical location that's so close between us and able to do that. And obviously, there's been a change in management in North Yarmouth, and we could certainly look at those things going forward if there was something that made sense. We've done things like that before.
It's significant.
So many of the services are like custodial.
I was gonna say, could you
Okay, so
potentially
custodial.
send us a list, or is there a way for us to understand kind of what those different pieces
Yeah, we
are?
can
That
put
would be
those
really
together.
helpful for us as we're
Yeah.
thinking about.
We clean the town hall, and do some of the other work for the facilities. We share a transportation garage. We also, Public Works does our snow removal along with our staff, so there's joint things on that. Some of the projects on the campus, the town of Cumberland helps with, so necessarily last year, for instance, we had work and site work that needed to be done, and Cumberland worked with us on that. And so there's been a number of projects like that we've shared on, but those are just some of the larger ones that we've done.
And the school has done stuff with us too.
Yeah.
The gym floors
Yep.
up at the West Custigo Hall, they did those, they stripped those for us last year. And I think you might be helping us out with some carpeting this year, cleaning some carpets.
Yes.
Or at least lending us the machine.
Yeah, no, we've got that. And then we've also done things like as we've had to remove equipment from our building, from kitchens and so forth.
Yeah.
We've made sure that that was with North Yarmouth to be able to use at your community center in West Custigo. So I think we are doing some of that, but always open to doing more, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
always open to doing more of those things.
And it's a, curiosity as we're looking and trying to think as our town is growing, what are the places where we can optimize and partner in those ways would be really helpful.
We're all trying also to get full staffed in custodial and facilities right now as well, so we still have some shortages there, and I'm sure there's some challenges in Public Works as well. But.
Please.
I have a question for Mark. You mentioned around 1,700 per resident is our per resident or per household? Is it
Resident.
per resident? Yeah. Okay. So similar to our per pupil costs. When you compare it to other towns, and it looks right in there, the burden on the taxpayer, at least. One way of looking at it is the burden on the taxpayer in Cumberland and North Yarmouth too is higher given the lack of commercial presence, right? And those taxes. So I'm asked this a lot, and I was asked this after we showed that slide a couple weeks ago. Can anybody speak to just what's going on as you strategize, as you think about how to possibly change, without changing the culture, but also welcoming in new businesses?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So the town of Cumberland, it's my understanding, has gone from somewhere in the 2.5% to 3% range of commercial base being a portion of its revenue to closer to 9 or 10 today. And so a lot of that has come through the use of economic enhancement tools like TIFs and other things, right? Designating these particular areas of town as TIF zones, utilizing those incentives to kind of maybe create credit enhancement agreements for various businesses to get them into town. We had a meeting actually just on Monday night where we extended a credit enhancement agreement to a local business in Cumberland who's hiring local people, lives in the community I don't know if I don't think it was on Route 1 if I'm mistaken, but
The businesses on Route 1.
business on Route 1. There's also some movement in West Cumberland right now. Obviously, there's a discussion about a potential roundabout. There's funding that needs to come with that. But I know myself, Councilor Kopp, and others, and our town manager is always keeping their finger on the pulse to try to attract more businesses to the town, to broaden that tax base. It's a difficult tightrope to walk, just given the fact that you could bring in a very, very, very large business, but that would obviously change the character of the town. And so it's a little more difficult to drum up the additional revenue that you might need from small micro businesses that maybe lend themselves more to the character of the town but don't provide the same massive amounts of taxation revenue. But it's something we're obviously working on. You know, I talk about walking and chewing gum at the same time. This is one of the many things that we're hoping to do in the town to help broaden that base for folks, because, you know, you look at other towns, Falmouth was slightly lower than ours in terms of their per pupil cost. But I think one of the big reasons for that is that very large commercial base that you see when you drive down Route 1. And I don't think there's a lot of folks in Cumberland that want Route 1 to look like that in Cumberland. And so, like I mentioned, it's a balancing act, but it's something we're really, really working on. And if anyone is listening that is thinking about starting a business, please come see us in Cumberland. We would love to talk to you.
I want to just add to that. You might not think of this as a commercial tax benefit, but Ocean View, when it's completely built out, be 100 homes, and some of those are passing almost the $1 million mark. So if you take that 600,000 to 100 to $1 million times 100, that is a area of town that has really no need of services. So that really is a commercial benefit to the community, and you know, I learned that last night. But it's something you have to think about it as part of the mix. And so when you talk about housing projects, they're not all going to produce children. Some of them actually produce a revenue stream, if you will. So something to think about.
I think in that respect too, we've been lucky because we have Route 1, which is kind of
Maybe move that mic a little closer.
we have Route 1, which is a major road through the town, and it's been slow coming. I've been on the council for 17 years, and we were at 2% commercial. Now we're up to 9.5, almost 10. I own a bunch of commercial property on Route 100, and it's been very slow coming on Route 100. And I compare Route 100 to kind of like Route 9, maybe a little bit more traffic, but not a lot more. And it's coming. I mean, it's slowly coming, but it's been a struggle. And I think the TIFs, we had this argument the other night. I mean, we had a gentleman that just didn't understand TIFs, didn't know why we did it, didn't think they were worth having, but he's wrong. Like Bob says, there are all kinds of different ways to hide the money, you know, to use it for infrastructure and stuff like that. So it's not just commercial businesses. So, but we're struggling, but we're getting there. What's Falmouth commercial?
26% of their tax base.
Yeah.
Which I think drastically affects that number.
Right.
Like you pointed out.
Right. And these TIF districts are short in length. I mean, in the length of the time of that they're here in comparison to the length that the town is here, they're used purposefully to do a lot of infrastructure projects that we normally would have to take out of the general fund. In 3 years of the first TIF district, one of the large ones will expire, and that'll bring $40 million. It'll look like a windfall for the town, and you guys will celebrate, because $40 million comes back over to the general fund. But we've planned for that. We know how to work that. We know what that impact is. Scott is the expert on the 279 form for the state, so he always educates me each year on, you know, what I owe for education, and every year it changes depending on the state's contribution to education. So our value being lower essentially means we get more money, our student population goes up, we get more money per student. All of that works in our favor, not against schools, and that's what people think, that we're stealing money from the schools, which we are absolutely not. We're absolutely enhancing the community with fire protection, with water lines, with road projects, with equipment that normally would have to come out of the general fund, and half of that money would be, I don't want to say penalized, but it's like being penalized because every $1 million that you raise in new property values, you lose about $500,000 in essentially state aid for education, additional county taxes, and other things that are sheltered in a TIF district. So it's complex. It's hard to explain to somebody very easily that, you know, here's this pot of money, here's that part of money, but every dollar in a TIF district, the council gets to use 100% of that, and if it's not in a TIF district and you see a big subdivision go, you know, 50% of that money is going to be lost directly to the town. It'll increase our contributions and our cost to our taxpayers for education alone. I think this year it's $6.92 or something like that, just under $7. So all of those things factor into what we look at when we try to build our capital plans and our economic plans for the future. Route 100 is going to be really, really exciting in the future. I think if we can get through this next step with the DOT, the state and the federal government will fund 90% of a $10 million roundabout and sidewalk projects up and down both sides of Route 100, almost to just beyond where Skillins is and just below the hill at Castle Rock. So that'll be pretty exciting for that whole area, as well as that whole commercial tax base. We've heard from 3 different businesses since we've had that presentation a year ago, and I'm very confident that that corridor will fill out pretty quickly if that roundabout comes. So more to come. I'm very excited about it. I'm really going to push hard to make sure that we are in line for that type of funding. You know, $9 million from the federal and state government is a pretty big nut, and it would be a huge facelift to that whole corridor. So when you arrive coming down Route 100, you're going to look like you've reached a destination point. You're going to say, wow, this is amazing. What's going on here? And you're going to want to participate in the businesses that we bring into that area. And I'm hopeful by the end of summer, you're going to see some businesses stepping up to the plate and coming to the planning board.
Okay. So we'll move on from the budget section. Briefly, I had some thoughts before we move on. As it relates to efficiency and schools specifically, this has been a bit of an evolution for me, being a business person and just sort of, you know, wanting to focus on process and efficiency and make things better and better. As it relates to schools, I think it's important to remember that we're not building widgets. You know, and we're not making plastic parts or something where we can focus just strictly on efficiency and cut that cost. These are kids. And so efficiencies of scale should sort of be avoided at some point. And I've sort of had to actively resist that mindset because we're not making widgets. And as school gets so large, it starts to affect the kids. You know, when a kid has to walk a quarter mile and it takes 5 minutes to get to the cafeteria, you know, maybe we're getting too big. So I just wanted to share that. It's something that I've had to get my head around. We're not building widgets. As it relates to our own budget, I wanted to thank our finance committee, and I wanted to share with all that if we included where we started with the wish list from our principals, we started at about 18%. And we had a lot of spirited discussions in the meetings. Thank you, Kim, Tom, Vanessa at home, Scott, Jeff. And we whittled it down a lot. So 7.4% may seem high compared to other years in our current environment. It's very good, I think. And then factoring in the growth rate where our mill rate is landing, it's actually quite impressive, I think. So I just wanted to share that. Okay, so moving on, we can talk more about the new school. We had a workshop a few weeks back, and I read this statement, and I'll do it here again for us all and for the public. Before we get into the details, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge what a tough and potentially emotional topic we are discussing here tonight, the new school. This project is big stuff. This school, its location, its function, and its significant cost affect people in real ways. We have folks whose kids will go here every day for years and want the best and most convenient approach in every way. We have people that have no kids in the system on fixed incomes that can't fathom how they can afford any increase in tax burden or other associated inconveniences to their town or neighborhood. We have people whose families have been here forever and contributed significantly to making this community the wonderful place that it is. And we have newcomers who might lack that history but want to continue to improve and invest in our community. We have people who have spent a few minutes reviewing this project and people who have invested hundreds or potentially thousands of hours into it, some of them volunteers. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that these are tough conversations on a tough topic with varied opinions and varied priorities. What I am sure of is that any project will not be perfect for every person in every situation. However, we should not let perfect be the enemy of good. I am also sure with the help of this community, we can put together a project that will gain broad support and continue the excellence in education we've come to expect. With all of that in mind, I'd ask us all to try to share our views and ideas and feelings in a professional and respectful way at this meeting and as we navigate this multi-year project. So, we had the workshop a few weeks ago. It was 3 hours. It's gripping, riveting video if you guys want to review it. I've been told it was boring, but I think that it was one of our best open and comprehensive discussions that we've had on this board. We reviewed so much of history. So what came out of that was a timeline that Jeff is pulling up now, which starts back at very early on in the process, 1820, and moves forward as it relates to our enrollment and how we got here. So I invite you all to review that, and this will be a work in progress, things that we should add to that. The idea of this timeline and improving it is that anybody can go here and see the history of how we got here and link to the various documents and supporting documentation of the logic of how we got here.
I will just throw out, I have looked at this and I think it's a great, I think at the time it was maybe even just still in draft form, and it really was very informative and I thought really well done. So kudos to all of you for taking the time to put this together and really go back in time to kind of document where we've been and kind of the approach to the future as well.
Yeah, as you go through it and you see things that are missing, significant key points in history that we left out, please send an email to Jeff and myself and we can add it in there. I really want people to be able to, someone new to town that doesn't have all that history to be able to go through this document and see how we got here, and hopefully the punchline is, oh, wow, there really was a lot of good logic put into this. And so we'll continue to improve on that. Of course, we have the referendum that we know failed. The reasons for failure are not on the ballot, which is frustrating. All we get is a yes or a no. We don't know why you voted no. So we can talk more about that. We all have our thoughts on that. But what came out of the workshop that night is we directed Jeff to do three things. One was to solicit for further land, something better. And so you all are probably aware of the RFP that has gone out and will be ending in a few days. I'll talk about that more in a minute. The other thing was to create a survey to the community and sort of try to answer the question of not only did you vote no, but why did you vote no? And that information would obviously be helpful. And then a communication plan was the third thing that we asked Jeff to come up with, and that was essentially if we aim for a referendum date of X, starting back from X 9 months or a year, what are all the things that we should do to check all the boxes for community engagement and communication? So we are partway through the process on those things. The RFP, you know, one approach would have been to just sort of ask the community to submit everything, and we've, on their own, and we've done that. How many submissions have we gotten so far?
For land,
Yeah, true submissions to the RFP.
I believe we've had 3.
And we just got one additional one.
Okay.
And we just got one more.
Yep.
Are any of those striking you as immediately viable? Or are they, I'm guessing the RFP has to meet certain criteria of
Yeah, we've given
this
them to our,
size.
we've given them to the architect to take a look at and assess the land, and then we'll have a better idea what's more viable than the others.
Yeah, we don't want to say yet because,
That makes sense.
you know, and we thank that we've had a couple realtors reach out to with information, which has been very helpful. But we want to wait to find out what the architect said before we say any more.
Yep. So aside from that, we sort of also wanted to check the box of reaching out to landowners that might have large parcels. I personally sort of think that it would be unlikely that somebody didn't know about the school, and certainly if they wanted to cash out on their big parcel of land, living in Cumberland, you would know that you could certainly get market value right now, which is attractive, and you would have cashed out. However, we went through the process of asking Bill and Diane for all the parcels. Larger, in Cumberland, we got over 10 acres, and in North Yarmouth, we got over 12 acres. And so that was a total of 301 properties. And Leanne Candora on our board offered to whittle those down. So she used a process of looking at where three-phase power is and where water is and where sewer is, and which ones didn't have houses of a certain value or size, because you know, we've been offered land before that has a house on it, but that house inflates the value or the cost by $1 million or something. So she whittled that list of 301 down to 9 viable properties potentially, and we have sent out letters to landowners. And we'll see. They would still have to submit to the RFP. We'll see what happens. But my conversation with Leanne after she went through that process, pretty much the first thing she said was, wow, it makes 80 Gray Road look pretty attractive. So 301 down to 9. And don't forget that if we find something better, the question is it $4 to $10 million better? Because that is the cost of delaying the project even a year. And when you pivot away from 80 Gray Road, you've got to re-engineer everything, which has a significant cost attached to it, and you might get a year down the road and find that there's a salamander on that land that brings it all to a screeching halt. Not that I don't love salamanders, but they're inconvenient sometimes. So it's not a question of better, is it better enough? All right. So that's where we're at with the RFP and land. That's going to come to a hard stop at some point, and we are going to have to rather commit to either 80 Gray Road or change. Again, that's a large hurdle to change. The other thing that we've got ready to go is a survey that Tom has put together and has taken a very agnostic and neutral approach to asking the questions of, you know, what is your feedback? The question will be in a week or two, if we have to stay with 80 Gray Road, do we add any more verbiage to that to let them know that? But we have that survey ready to go.
Ask a question about that.
Yep.
Because we had a recreation committee meeting last week, and we learned in the recreation committee meeting that the survey's going to be electronic. But in Cumberland, we have over 100 people who get our weekly update. They get paper copies. And if you're really looking to find out perhaps why people who receive paper copies voted a particular way, you're not going to get that information if you only have an electronic survey. So I know that there was some back and forth just based on your representative to the rec committee, but I really strongly encourage you to be able to have a paper copy of that available to people.
Yep.
And so I just needed to put that plug in.
And I'll just throw out, if you need our support, like when we did our survey, was that last year? Oh God. We just invited folks, if they wanted a paper copy, to come into the office, and one of our town folks had a certain number printed out or whatever, and then they would submit it. I think we ended up having.
Mail it to the people who get the weekly.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep, and I think we ended up getting 50 or so paper submissions. So, I mean, we did get them, and I think there's a level of, like, you're trying to engage, right? It feels good. I'll also just, I don't know what your solicitation plan was, Tom, but we also sent paper postcards to every household so that it wasn't just an electronic communication that was also letting folks know that the survey was out there. They got the postcard that had the website, had a QR code, and so even, I mean, we have a lot of folks that get the Cumberland Crier, but it's not every household, so we wanted to make sure we were at least getting something. It was pretty cost effective.
And not all citizens are on social media.
Yeah, it was like
That's
$1,500 to send the postcard, so it's pretty cheap to do the postcard. So I just throw that out there, not knowing what your plan was. But
Yeah,
just
that is really helpful.
Yep.
We don't want to miss any of our community members here. So we did have in mind paper copies being available at Town Hall, but the postcards, that would be really helpful. And how did you go about distributing those?
So we use a
Mailing company.
Yeah, Cumberland Mailing Company. So they did the postcards, they took care of postage, and it was just kind of like a flat rate. I think Whitney designed the postcard.
Yeah, we just gave them the design and the mailing list, and they basically did all the work. Mailing, everything was very, very cost effective. The other thing, Allison, the work that you did with Brian Roberts, the doctor of stats, was really helpful to us, I think, in getting the questions worded correctly. And he actually helped process the data when we got it from, I think we did SurveyMonkey, and we got over 5,300 responses. Yeah. So it was very, very cost effective overall, and it was very helpful, the data that we got back. So
I will throw it out there, because Tom, I know you are a data person. Like, I am a data person, so I will just throw out that I also was like, oh, I can just process this. This is no big deal. And it was just so much, and that the company we use, Brian Roberts, like, they have the macros built, and like it was very easy for them to process it versus me having to build macros and build this and do that. So I also throw that out. That's obviously a little more money depending on how many questions you have in your survey. If it's 5 questions, this may all be moot, but if it is a more lengthy survey, I will also throw out they are very efficient, because it's all they do is process kind of survey responses and statistical variances, but it's literally like they hit a button and it cranks.
I live for this stuff.
I know you do. And so do I, Tom.
Grab a beer and do some crosstabs. Let's hang out.
But I know you have a day job, so so I just throw that out there.
Can I ask a quick question about the survey itself? I know, I don't remember if it was who over here was saying that it's specifically looking at if you voted no, why did you vote no? I would also encourage you to ask the question, if you voted yes, what made you vote yes? Because I know I spoke to a number of people who wanted the building to potentially be larger to encompass a bigger bump or those kind of pieces. And I think it would be really valuable also to know what are the selling points that people are really excited about. So if that's, I just wanted to make sure that that was in there, because that wasn't mentioned when you talked about the survey earlier.
I glossed over it. Tom
Okay.
did a good job.
It is.
Great. Okay.
And we can share that before it goes out as well.
Yeah.
For further input. So the third part was the communication plan. So we have found a company actually in North Yarmouth that I think will do a good job helping us with communication and engagement. So the 2 parts that I think at this point we more or less have sort of committed to is asking them to help with that plan, what that plan should look like, 9 months forward, 12 months forward, whatever they think, checking all the various boxes, mailers, this sort of whatever, and then help with a website. So the thinking at this point is that we take this page and pull it into its own domain and make it a little bit easier to navigate. Specifically, one of the things that I think would be helpful is to have FAQs that were very easy to expand and collapse, and just sort of make it a little bit more user-friendly, easy to navigate, to send you down a path and give you the information. And all of our folks in the district office have other things to do, so we thought maybe we could find somebody that focused on this. And I think Kim can speak to what a challenge that is to try to get out all the information, and we want to try to work smarter, not harder, and answer it once on the website where we affect 100 or 1,000 people rather than emails back and forth. So I've really glossed over things very quickly, so I'll open it up.
So I was able to kind of sit with Kim a little bit during the farmers market and kind of talk with people when we were, talking about the new school with residents and with voters. And even tonight, we talk about things like TIFs and CEAs and the mill rate. And I'm not particularly bright, but it took me probably 5 sit-downs with Bill until I really understood a lot of these things in a way that I could, one, kind of distill the information myself, but also communicate it proactively to residents. And I think we've all seen, over the past 18 months, things sometimes explode on social media, a lot of misinformation, and I think that we should be prepared for that when we look at kind of the new plan. I mean, I think a consultant to be able to talk about, or kind of create a timeline is great, create the website is great, but a lot of these discussions kind of happening on the ground, who is there to really clearly understand like what the mill rate is and how you can figure out what this tax burden is going to mean for you in a way that's really easy versus them having to, it can just be, I think it can be a lot of information. It's complex information. And at some point, if we're not presenting it in a way that's really easy to understand, it becomes kind of more fun for people to tack on to whatever people are saying on social rather than really understanding what it means for themselves and their households. So just a thought.
Yeah, I was just going to add, that's a really good point. I think with any sort of big project or small project is having some sort of bumper sticker or one pager or whatever it is that you can just keep talking about over and over again. And it's clearly defined and it's easy to understand and easy to follow. It's a big project, but we can also distill it down. That's one of the things that we talked about with the consultants that we're looking to partner with, is just that. We need some information that people can really hold on to. And I think that's some learning for us too on trying to get this project passed. Yeah.
I will just throw out, because Amy's not here, so I'm gonna
steal
play.
my thunder.
Oh,
Yeah, no, you guys
no,
go
you
ahead.
go.
No, you go. You go.
I'll just steal the North Yarmouth thunder. Was how to be able to kind of, with more time, I know some of it was just time we had, be able to kind of use local champions to get the word out so that it's not just on all of you as school board members. And I think Amy brought up, what was it? It was like something in a box.
Meetings in a box. Yarmouth
Thank you.
did it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Meetings in a box. And so if it's kind of the same thing, that you're kind of giving your champions, whoever, like just residents, their meeting in a box to host in their home about like, okay, here's how I understand it. Here's how I've interpreted it as impacting me. But they're having that conversation with 15 other friends, with food and beverages, and it's not you, the kind of given the side eye, skeptical of those in municipal government. It's, no, this is my friend who I know is really smart and I know what they do for their day job, or I know that they wouldn't, be trying to pull one over. They don't have any real skin in the game other than they think this is a good idea. So I throw that out. If you're putting out your timeline, I think being able to use champions in the community, in both communities, to kind of get the word out.
So I applaud you for looking for the reasons why it failed, because we all assume that it failed for the dollar, but it may not have failed for the dollar. It might have been 30 people on Route 88 who don't want to see their kindergarten first grader or second grader go 12 miles across town to go to school. So I think you really need to know the reasons why it didn't fail. I think for many people it was a cost issue, and I don't know, I've just been playing with some numbers, and I have a long history, and I consider myself an educator, and I sent to you, to the school board member and the Cumberland Town Council, a couple of articles today on community schools, and I mentioned this when I was on the school configuration committee, but I think, and I'm just putting it out there because I've shared it with a couple of people, I'd like to see us look at a K-5 North Yarmouth school for many, many reasons other than its sound educational policy. That should be our priority, sound educational policy. There are benefits to community schools. There are benefits to multi-age schools where there are older kids working with younger kids. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Wilson School kids walking over to the middle school to do book buddies, you know. Do you have more than 25 portable classrooms at present?
We have 21 currently, and we will have 29 rooms next
So looking
fall.
at, I just did my little enrollment divided by, you know, number of North Yarmouth kids divided by 20. And you need, just for North Yarmouth kiddos in K through 5, you need 20 classrooms plus your allied arts. So I'll just list a number of benefits for the people at home who are watching other than educational benefits. You could build a school with a smaller footprint because K1 kids need to be on the first floor, but 3rd, 4th, 5th graders could be up. So you wouldn't need a sprawling school. You could build a school that goes up. So you'd need less of a footprint. You'd still need the same number of people. But your parking lots might be closer to the school or not way off in the forest. I don't know. When I grew up, Cumberland and North Yarmouth were two very different communities. And I understand why people in North Yarmouth might not want their kids only to go to North Yarmouth schools. But that's not the case anymore. We are really very similar towns. In fact, I joke half-heartedly that some people in North Yarmouth don't realize they live in North Yarmouth and not Cumberland. You know, people in North Deering think they live in Portland, and I'm sure there are people in North Yarmouth who might think they live in Cumberland because they come here for recreation, and they come here for the library, and they come here to Food Stop. And but I hope that the board remains open-minded towards other school possibilities. That would free up your space for what your potential is going forward. If you had K-5, you have a middle school that's for 900 people. And if you just had 6, 7, 8, there'd be plenty of room there. You might need to do some reconfiguration of the Wilson School, but Wilson School started out as a 3-6 school. I went to 3rd grade there. I was the only 3rd grade class at Wilson School because of overflow at Cumberland Elementary, or the dump school. So I'm just putting that out there for consideration. It's a financial consideration. It really is a best practice for kiddos consideration. That's why I shared the couple of articles with you. I taught, my very first job was in Woolwich. It was a K-8 school. They're not much bigger now than they were back then. It was a wonderful school. I taught at North Yarmouth Memorial School for 3 years. My kids went to North Yarmouth Memorial School. A lot of really great learning went on up there. They were out of the fray. They were out of the chaos. They're not distracted by cars coming in and out and buses coming in and out. I would not want to be teaching in a classroom that faced the driveway, Campus Drive or whatever, when the middle school buses start driving in and all your little kids go, oh, it's almost time to go. You know, you've got to hold them for another hour while they're watching the middle school kids leave. That's, you know, my one distraction at North Yarmouth was when I had a fox show up during silent reading, and everyone went running to the window, a fox, there's a fox, and that was it. But that's enough I have to say on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to kind of circle back to what Allison was talking about with the meeting in a box. And one of the things you said, and I absolutely agree, the school system is not producing widgets, but you are producing a fantastic product, right? And there's a lot of things to celebrate at that product. And what people are doing when they're paying the taxes and building a school is they're making an investment in that. So what I would love to see the SAD do moving forward, and we've talked a little bit, we meet every Friday, and it's Allison and Mark and myself and Amy and Jason and Ann, and we kind of talk about ideas, and we had a little debrief. And one of the things was, let's try to give the SAD as many opportunities to highlight the great things that are happening at the school. And it doesn't always have to be about this brand new school that we're building. It's, come to our select board meeting, send somebody out, just talk about what's happening in, with chorus, what happened, just some sort of event that humanizes and shows like how great of a product you're actually producing year over year. And that's the reason why, so many people want to move to this area, is to be part of this. So let's showcase for the people who are here in as many avenues as possible, what that is that you're doing. And I think that one of the struggles that I see, being on the select board and watching the SAD is that, you pop up at the time when when the school budget comes up, and then we need to build a new school. And then it doesn't feel like there's this huge connection to the community sometimes with the things that are happening other than what's happening at the school itself. So I think that you can utilize everyone in this room and utilize the resources and the meetings and the outreach that we're already doing to help highlight that. We just need to be, we all just need to be part of that. And I would invite, I've invited, different people, to come to our meetings, like the chorus I mentioned before, to come and sing at the opening. The folks who won the prize on the PFAS, we invited them to come and talk about PFAS, and that will be an introduction to a PFAS discussion we're going to have about what's happening locally. There's lots of great ways that we can tie in what you guys are doing. We just need to connect on that more, I think. So I would offer that up as a suggestion and a discussion point for the future.
Yeah, Brian, I wanted to thank you for bringing that up because I've been meaning to follow up on our end. Jason, can you give any update on where we're at with that plan to send people from the board to select board and town council?
I'm in favor of it. I just don't know what it looks like on a daily, weekly basis. I think that the onus can be as much on the town boards as it can be on us. Obviously, we want to share the good things, the warm things that comes out of the school. I just, the people on this board are volunteers. There's only so much time, and so I'm open to it, I guess.
Send me Tommy.
Okay, Tommy, every meeting in North Yarmouth, you should attend. I'm open to it. It's just
no, I get it.
Time in the day,
I get it,
and priorities. We could send out a communication to, high schoolers and middle schoolers, whoever, asking them to come up with ideas to visit your meetings. I think that's maybe more organic. I'm just a little hesitant to create another task for this board or for our administration to have to show up and do another report. I'd rather it be like, community wants to come to your meetings and deliver the fun things. I'm not opposed to it.
No,
it's another thing to do.
Yeah, Brian, I will just say, one of the things, you've talked about the meetings, but I think one of the things that we're noticing is that YouTube, because there's really no local access per se anymore, so YouTube is becoming kind of our replacement, at least on the school level. And we've used our YouTube channel just for board meetings for the most part. So we just started, and actually if you go to our YouTube channel, we just started doing this a week ago. We've now added a lot of categories to YouTube. We have a plan now that we're building between now and September to have more highlights so that people can look at our YouTube channel and catch an athletic game or look at an event that we just held. So it's not just board meetings, there's all these categories that you can go and watch a recent whatever. I know it's not the same thing that you're talking about, but I think we're trying to get the message out in different ways, whether social media, whether YouTube. We actually have beefed up our own recognition in our own board meetings because there weren't a lot of them. We weren't recognizing a lot of students at our board meetings, and I know that's been a goal of this board. So now we have a rotational schedule where every other meeting we have a recognition that's built in from schools and others on a rotation, so that we're not just asking, it's just kind of rotated. So we've tried different things too, but you know, we can help with the communication that we're already doing. We put a lot of good things out about the schools, but I don't know if it reaches the towns as much as possible. I do appreciate both towns for including us in the crier and the notes. That's been very helpful in trying to at least reach as much as possible. We want to do more.
I honestly think in order for you to get this school to fly in these two towns is you have to educate the elders in these communities. My parents have lived here their entire lives. Their first house that they bought was $10,200 brand new. That house has since been sold 6 times. The last time it was sold for $380,000 with very little improvement. To them, $73 million is a lot of money. $73 million today is probably what $700,000 was back then. That price tag is what scares everybody. But they don't have all of the facts. They don't know what those portables cost the community every year. They don't know the daily ins and outs of everything that goes on now. They're still living back in the 60s and the 70s. I mean, I'll be honest with you, my house didn't cost $800,000, but that's what it's worth. I can't afford to pay that kind of money for it now, but yet somebody with 3 kids that lives in Connecticut would love to live there to go to your school system. And that's the problem. I mean, I think, and I wish we had the numbers in front of us on percentage of elders in our community, Bill. What, 55 and older? Allison, we did the survey just a while ago.
I knew that question was coming.
It was mind-boggling.
Yeah, it hadn't moved as much as I think we had expected it to move.
But I truly, honestly think that if you can educate the elders in this community as to, you know, the portables cost you this, and it's going to continue to cost you this for the next 10 years unless you do something. I mean, I think the truth is in the information, and it needs to get out to those people. And Shirley, you hit it right on the head. A lot of them don't look at it electronically. My parents don't. I mean, I think it's education is what it is, as much to the elders as it is to the young people.
So we can fix a lot of this by being engaged, but sitting back and doing nothing isn't going to work.
Exactly.
So we're swapping notes here, and we're talking about, you know, maybe beginning in January, basically hosting events down at Valhalla. That place is not going to be used on the weekend. Somebody write out an invitation so we get 50 people for a social just to talk about this. The more we can get the message out, and we can't do it, the meeting in a box is a great idea, but we have to recruit people that are willing to do that and willing to go out with the message. So without those folks, we're just going to be doing this year after year and pretending things are going to change, and it won't. So, you know, I will definitely commit to doing something at Valhalla twice, 2 Sundays a month, right, from January until June. Because I think that has been an opportunity that we're learning with our seniors. And we have over 700 properties. Over 20% of the properties in Cumberland have people over 65 in them. So we have a lot of seniors and a lot of people that are not connected. They're not even connected to the town. They're just basically out there saying, yeah, I like the town. I go to, you know, town hall once a year to register my car, and that's about it. And they come to vote, and we do vote. And a lot of people vote in both communities. We have a very high percentage of voters. So we can do a better job getting the message out, but we have to find people that are going to be our cheerleaders and going to be educated and can share the correct message. Because right now, social media has hijacked the message, and if we don't change that, we're going to have the same result, you know, in a year from now, if that's where the board heads with another vote. I think the survey is critically important, Tom. I really glad that you and Allison are on the same wavelength, because I had no idea what she was talking about half the time. So for me, it was really exciting to get Dr. Roberts involved, and it cost us less than $3,000 to have him tweak the data so it wasn't skewed, and he could give us the plus or 5% accuracy in each one of our questions. And we use a lot of that for policy setting at the council level. And we do have people that care a lot. I care a lot. I've got 3 granddaughters that are coming through the system. My son went through the system. So this is a generational thing for me. I don't know what's going to happen after those 3 girls, but for me, I am very excited about what the district has done, what they have done for the kids in this community, what they have done for education, and the reputation that we have brought to both these communities with such a powerful and awesome school district. So I will commit to, and I know it's going to be you, Kim, and it's going to be you, Tig, that are going to be helping me on Sundays, after church, of course. And we'll be down there, and we will talk to people. And I think talking to people is half the problem, because people, if they don't know where to get the information in a comfortable way, not coming here, not coming to the council meeting, but coming to a place that's safe. I don't care if you have it in the gym. I don't care if you have it somewhere. The community center that North Yarmouth has is one of the most amazing sites. The Enchanted Ball this year, I just absolutely loved it. It was awesome. My 2 granddaughters were there this year. So there are so many places that we have that would make people feel more connected, and I think it would be a great way to build our communities as well. So I'm all in, and you tell me what you need, and we will start when you're ready. And Tig and Kim have already volunteered, so thank you both. I appreciate that.
I really want to emphasize something that Bill said, which is essentially going to where people are. I don't know about the rest of you as elected members, but I knocked on a lot of doors when I was running. And I talked about the school, and I talked about town and all of those pieces. And those relationships have staying power. And I talked to folks who probably didn't vote for me, who definitely didn't agree with me, but we still had real conversations. And I think you can't underestimate the value of neighborly knocking on doors. There are a lot of us around this table, and there are a lot of us who are not here because of school vacation week coming up, who are also not here around this table. And I think that there's a big opportunity for us to not just ask people to come to us, even if it's at Toddy Brook or Valhalla or the community center or the school, but to go to them. It is a lot of work, and I think if there is to be a new school in this community, that's the kind of work that needs to happen for us to get a yes vote. And so I just really want to encourage that, and I know that the 5 members of our board, we will go out and talk to people in North Yarmouth, and I just hope that everyone would join us in that activity, and really going to people and having those real conversations.
I wonder if in the survey, perhaps we have that question. Will you be willing to be one of those persons that go forward to the community? I would note we did very much go to the community. I mean, there were visits to the Aging in Place, the library, Twin Brooks, and honestly, in most of the attempts, even though it was advertised, people didn't really show. So I agree, knocking on doors, but also maybe having teams, someone from North Yarmouth, someone from Cumberland, mix up someone from the town council, someone not from any of the boards, from the North Yarmouth. If we mix and keep just mixing and showing up and answering questions, it's the only way it's going to get done. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can use the new school project as a way just to further continue the working relationship between our 3 bodies as well. It is an opportunity for us to collaborate and reach out to the community and just, again, continue to think about ways that we can work together differently. I know I had mentioned to Jeff last week, well, what if it's something that, every so often, too, the town managers, superintendent, and then chairs and vice chairs of each of these bodies also come together on a periodic basis to make sure that we're just having that dialogue and that we're all on the same page. Because while this meeting is great, and other joint meetings we've had are helpful, I just think we need something that happens more in the interim versus these large gatherings.
So I want to make sure that Shirley's point doesn't get buried, because I know there's at least one other person in this room who loves the idea of community schools. Is that something that, as a board, we should discuss before the survey goes out to get a sense of whether, just how popular that option is?
So the survey actually now has there's a set of items about the preferences for a new school for the community. And one of the items is about a preference for community school model versus the current model that we have. Credit to Jason for suggesting this. It was a good addition. A couple thoughts about it. It strikes me as a pretty big pivot at this point if we were to go in that direction, one that would influence the long-term planning of the district in a really significant way. I think we should be open to all possibilities and listen to our constituents to see what their preferences are. But I feel like it could be pretty difficult to move in that direction. And it's something that's been considered in the past, right, Jeff?
Yes. Yeah, it was considered in 2019. We had a steering committee, and there was a lot of debate about that, actually. Mm-hmm. And then the recommendation from that committee was not to do that. There were so many different options that were looked at.
And my other thought is, if we were to go in that direction and put forth a proposal for a new school in North Yarmouth, I wonder, since it seems like our margin of error here and to make this happen is pretty slim based on what happened in November, is it going to be too tough a sell for the residents of Cumberland to say, we're going to build this new school, it's going to cost us millions of dollars? I don't know, who knows what the price tag would be, but it's just going to be for our North Yarmouth kids. And if we need to build a new community school at some point in the future in Cumberland, then that's decades off. And I don't know the answer to that. It strikes me as a difficult sell, though the survey results might tell us something different.
See, I have a totally different viewpoint. I think it would be an easier sell to people of North Yarmouth. Again, it's owned by the district. It's a district school, not a North Yarmouth school, but it would house they would educate the community of North Yarmouth, the kids there. And you could involve, I think it would go a long way toward community building in North Yarmouth, where I don't want to look negative on the community of North Yarmouth, but a lot of the discontent I see is sort of people in North Yarmouth sort of yes this, no this, I don't want to grow, I do want to grow, kind of. I think a community school would go a long way not only to educate the kids, but to bring a sense of community to the North Yarmouth community. And for example I had about that is, you may have a 65, 70-year-old retired person in North Yarmouth who is looking to do some volunteer work. I know we have a number of people at the library who are looking to volunteer in different literacy factions, but they might not want to come to the giant campus in Cumberland Center to do some volunteer work, where if they were in their own community, they might go to a community school. So those are things.
I think I must have misspoke. I think it's an easy sell for the residents of North Yarmouth. I think it would be a difficult sell to get the people of Cumberland to vote.
Not to North Cumberland people I've spoken to, but.
I could be totally wrong about that.
Unless the price is lower?
Yeah, I don't. A lot of people I think I've spoken to think North Yarmouth should have their own school.
I have to say, I think that would be a very hard sell in North Yarmouth. I'm sorry. I'm trying to process some of the critiques of our community that I just heard, which is really challenging as a representative of this community. So I want to reflect that back to you, Shirley, that we have a very strong community in North Yarmouth, and it is.
It was a risky thing for me to say, just seeing what I see for the discontent.
I think that all of our communities have places where we are struggling, and I think that all of our communities have places where we are really strong. And I think that it is an unfair characterization of our community to frame us that way. We are I know that we are a valued part of this partnership. And I think categorizing the community as one that will be healed by a elementary school where we're separated from the community that we're a large part of would actually work in the opposite direction. I am interested to see what a survey would say about that and how our communities would respond. I do really think that removing North Yarmouth kids until they complete 5th grade and then bringing them to a campus that no longer feels like their campus would make substantial challenges and create a divide between communities that we have really built together. My daughter, who's going into 9th grade next year, has amazing friends who she has grown up with from Cumberland. And separating those communities and then forcing them to come together in the middle school isn't a recipe, I think, for disaster in an integration of strong collective community building that you really strive for as the values of MSAD 51. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out in the survey, but I would ask that you avoid or stop criticizing our community as someone that, as a community that is so...
That was not my intent, so I'm sorry you heard it that way. And I would encourage you to read the articles that I sent you.
Andrea, I want to thank you for those comments because there's a lot that resonates there with me. And I think for me, I agree that the neighborhood model, there's so many benefits to it. And we are currently already a one campus. I think if we truly wanted to be a neighborhood model, we would have to move K-5 Cumberland to a different site in terms of like kind of going off of what Andrea is saying, because then it does really delineate our district more if Cumberland is still here for K-5 and then North Yarmouth would be coming for 6-12. Other areas that have follow community models, the K-5 are, off-site there and then move to a more centralized location.
I would just say, just strictly from logistical standpoint, I do like community school concepts. However, I think most of the ones that I can think of that work really well have historically been working well. They've been working well for decades or 100 years. And they've been in place, even in like Portland, there's neighborhood schools, but that's been a historic characteristic of Portland. And then in a lot of rural areas I can think of, that's been kind of just organically, there's been neighborhood schools or community schools. I think in this district, there's been a long history of both towns working together, but just logistically, even if it was a smaller price tag to build a school in North Yarmouth for students to go there from North Yarmouth, we would need to invest a lot more money in Mabel I. Wilson School because we're going to have a lot more students in Cumberland at those grades that we would need to plan for. There is not enough space at the Wilson School for all of the Cumberland students in K-5.
I guess I'd ask that, this is a reshuffle of the deck or a re-examination of where you're going. So I guess that my advice is be open. I think you've got a hard sell. It's obvious we need a new school. I mean, you don't have to drive around the campus to understand that, but it's still going to be a hard sell. So I think if there's an opportunity for you to take another look, configuration or layout of the school, I think the guesstimate that the town manager and I had, we're closing it on $100 million by the time you get done with this thing, by pushing this thing out 4 years to completion, and that's a big number to try to sell to the communities. That's we're not $70 million now; we're $100 million. The other thing that I want to point out is how much we changed. Sheboygan Island had 2 high schools. think about that for a minute. Chebig Island had 2 high schools. It's almost incomprehensible that there was that many kids on that island, and they had a high school on each end of the island. You talk about we're not producing widgets. Sometimes we need to look at that a little differently too. The military cranks out qualified people in a hurry by mechanized education and training programs. And I'm not suggesting that SAD 51 is the military and that we're cranking out kids that are just learning by rote. But again, there are lots of different models across the country and the world that work. My nieces and nephews all went to high schools in excess of 4,000 students. They all went to college. They all were contributing members of society. So, you know, would I want my kid in a 4,000 pupil high school? No, I'd rather he went to Greeley. But again, different things work, and so I think it's important to you know, keep an open mind. And in fact, you know, when I think about community schooling, you know, I'm almost of the opinion maybe we should be building 2 small schools, because it's. I'm thinking about the potential for growth. West Cumberland. I'm thinking about the huge potential of growth in North Yarmouth. You know, you look at the vacant land in North Yarmouth, and you know, Cumberland has 26 square miles. I think North Yarmouth has twice as many square miles. So it's if we don't start thinking about where we're going to be in 50 years, 75 years, and having the long viewpoint, we can't build a school for the next 10 years. We've got to be placing ourselves in a position for the next 30, 50 years. So, and my last thing that I would say is we need to meet more than once a year.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of strange, but I'm a car guy. You've got a community that wants an Equinox, and you're trying to sell them an Escalade. That's the way I look at this. They can buy 2 Equinoxes for what they can buy. They probably can buy 3 Equinoxes now for what a $120,000 Escalade costs. I relate it to the same thing. You've got a customer that comes in and they can afford this, but they can't afford this. So we got to meet somewhere in the middle. You go looking for an alternative. And it's tough. I mean, it is tough because a lot of people are just so money-minded. $73 million is what killed this project. I'll guarantee it. If it was half of that, you'd have been building the school today. And I know you can't build it for $35 million. I mean, but there's a lot of people that don't know that. And that's the problem in this community. They're still living in the homes that they bought in the 50s and the 60s, and they don't realize what their home is worth.
Well, the issue is that they think we're trying to sell them an Escalade, but what we're putting out there is an Equinox. Like, this is an affordable project.
I know that, but they don't, because they don't realize that those portables, you're leasing those portables. That's just like leasing an Escalade, in my mind. They don't realize that. And that's where you need to drive the point home, is this is what it's costing us for these leases, and we need to stop this. We need to own something. I mean, and it's the old guard that is going to prevent this from happening. It's not me. I've got 4 grandkids that are coming into the school system just like Bill does, and I want the best for them. I want them to have a better education than I did. And I don't mind the $73 million school, but my parents say, holy God, $73 million? I mean...
I think that's all part of the education process, though. Well, all that's being done in this phase of the process is building blocks. How many How many blocks do you need for classrooms? What are those square footages? And when you get to the end, it comes out to 135,000 square feet, and you multiply times $400 a square foot, which sounds crazy compared to what we were paying just 5 years ago. And that's where the dollars start. It isn't, the architects aren't designing some Taj Mahal, which everybody, when you see the number, that's where you jump immediately. But when you look at what each program and each classroom and the cafeteria and all those things, it comes out to this much square footage, and all we're doing at this point in the process is taking what the building costs are at $400 a square foot and multiplying times the square footage. And then all the other incidental costs, extending the water mains, traffic intersections, all that work. So this reminds me so much of the Performing Arts Center. It's scary. When we started that process back in the early, I don't know, maybe it was around 2005, 2006, Scott, and we went back for a couple of $300,000 more because the project came over and the voters said no. That project was $3 million. We ended up spending $10 million when we finally built it. And that's what scares me more than anything right now. I don't know what that cost is inflating annually, that $400 a square foot. Is it 10%? Is it 12%? Is it even more than that? And that's what, this is going to be well over $100 million when this finally gets built.
Yeah, our architect shared a story of the Camden project, Camden Rockport, that he was involved in, and it failed the first time and then passed a year later or 2 years later, and it was basically a 30% increase.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I really appreciate your comment about the RFP with the land. Like, is it a better piece of land? Is it $4 to $6 to $8 million better, or is it just slightly better? I think that type of information, we are, in controlling of budgets, we're fiduciaries to taxpayers, right? And part of that job isn't just selling them a new school, which we frankly need, in my opinion, but educating them as well on what the cost of time is. Right? And every time you delay a vote or you vote no on something, as valid as that no vote might have been, there is a cost associated with that. And that cost is likely to increase. And it's just an economic fact. And so I think I appreciate that information that you were sharing out about that, because I think folks should know that too. Because when you start thinking, oh, is this piece of land $1.2 million or is it $1.5 million? At the end of the day, the longer you wait, if you have to pay $4 or $5 million in different differential costs to move it, that $200,000 is a drop in the bucket at that point. So,
the inflationary cost plus is all the interim costs, such as the temporary space, that we have to really talk about a lot more. And I think that's what will hopefully help people understand the investment is not in the right place when we're looking about temporary space and putting time off. The investment, and people have to decide that. Obviously, we respect the vote that happened in November. We've also got to provide the information. What does that mean, and what are the implications for continuing to wait? And then you can't really qualify. I guess you can't quantify. You may be able to qualify, what is it doing to the students and our staff on campus in a really crowded situation. We had 540 students, I think, in 2016. Today we'll have 780 students in Wilson School, same school building. Next fall. So that's a pretty large increase in a short period of time.
So I want to ask the crappy question, because when we talk about how information is presented and educating the public and optics of things. I mean, one very small example is that 73 million. We kept hearing, oh, they're building the Taj Mahal. No, that's what it costs to build a school. And so as we're trying to get that information out there, to bounce it back to both of you, we also see a lot of land that is being developed. And, we talked, but it's been brought up, Ocean View or, houses that will not have kids in them. But perhaps you could also think about educating our citizens as to what you're doing, because to us sometimes, and certainly to people that I spoke with leading up to the election, it's, well, there's all this land. If they've got land to build a development, you've got land to build a new school. Why are 5 more houses going up in this little section? People are going to move in there with their kids. You're just going to have more kids that you have to bring into a school. So, like I said, it's a crappy question, But I just wonder how the three of us bodies can engage better with the town, because what they see is we're just building, and now we have to build a new school. Does that make sense?
And so how the three of us bodies can come up with like an all-encompassing comprehensive plan.
So we don't build anything.
Yep.
That's the landowners. Like
Yep.
we set the rules for what type of buildings and how many buildings can go in a given year. That's what we do. We don't build those buildings.
You can't stop growth. You can manage it. There is one solution. I've said this many times jokingly. You can make your town less desirable and people will stop coming.
Yep.
But we are a victim of our own success. It is a wonderful place to live, and all we can do is sort of manage it and try to plan for the future.
So the timing of your vote, are we still looking at June of 2024 for the vote?
Yep. So June of 24 is what we're thinking right now, and that's pretty much if we stay at 80 Gray Road. If we pivot away from that, you're pretty much at a year minimum. I think to speak to a lot of the things said here tonight, I think the timing of the last vote being in November was terrible. Everybody is, checks out in the summer. Nobody's paying attention, and then school starts again, and everybody's, panicking and sort of wants to get involved and ask questions, and that time frame was so compressed. And then, misinformation and folks that didn't want the project, it was really hard to overcome. So I'm not a fan of trying to do a November vote. June of 24 is what we're aiming for at this point. But again, that could change if we leave 80 Gray Road. We'll see. Many of you talked tonight about Tig and Bill and Ron and Andrea and many others about champions in the community, and in my opinion, if we get a 51% vote, well, okay, we did it, but I really would like to see 65-70% buy-in, and I think that that will require everybody in this room. And it's not, I hear criticism often, say you as in the district, and I think it needs to be we on this project and this topic. If you believe that we need a new school, then you've got to be willing to get into the fray a bit. There was a couple of people, after the referendum failed, there was a couple of people on Facebook that, wow, they just did a great job, like combating the misinformation and doing it in a professional way that wasn't emotional, with facts. They were super well informed, and I was rooting for them. And I was just like, that's what we need more of. And I understand not wanting to get into the fray, but we need more people that are willing to do that organically, professionally, unemotionally, to have those conversations and push back on and say, oh, actually, no, that's not right. It went like this. So I think we need everybody to be champions to really make this pass well, not just 51%. That's my opinion. The neighborhood school thing, I am a fan of the general thought. I think the thing there is we're not building a brand new district, and change is hard. Change is really hard. So where we're already together, I think that could be difficult. I think the most telling information will be what comes out of the survey. If that were overwhelming, I think it would be hard to ignore. But my suspicion is change is very hard, and I wouldn't expect that to come out of it. As much as I like the idea, I came from a neighborhood model system where we came together in 7th grade. And I was from one of the smaller towns, and it didn't really bother me coming in to the big towns. I think it has a lot of advantages. We were talking about efficiencies and not being a widget. But change is hard. That's all the general thoughts I had on various things. Other stuff before we move on?
June of 24 is a great election. it'll be another primary, and it'll be really exciting. We'll get 50% without anything related to the school or anything else. We'll get 70% voter turnout if the school is on that ballot. So we've got a short time period to start planning and getting our houses in order as far as getting communication out, and the sooner you can give us that information, the better. The one thing I do want to caution is that we get away from the schedule you produced for this year for the vote, the ballot validation vote, and then the referendum on the budget. We miss an entire week of absentee ballot voting. This legislature, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to fix that. I know Jeff and Scott have both been working with our legislature to try to help you with the timeline that you have for passing your budget, but we have to really make sure that we can get that out, because losing a week is terrible. I can't put the school ballots in the absentee ballot envelopes until you have that vote. Next day, they can be in there, but the week of, because there's 4 days that we missed this year that I can't put those ballots into those envelopes. So we got to make sure that happens, and we got to make sure we're all on the same page with that, because it'll be a big turnout. There'll be over 50% absentee voting, and it'll be a really exciting vote. But I'm going to tell you, 60% is not going to happen. So we bought 2,500 feet of coastline for a little over $3 million. It passed by 26 votes. It was the best thing this town has done for the community and for forever. So 50.01% is perfect. So, sell the message, man. So I've been there. It's hard. It's exciting, but there are people that are just, we're not going to be able to reach. And, if we could get to 55%, I would tell you that is a huge success. So.
Do we have a question on the survey about desired referendum date? Because my impression is that there are many community members, and myself included, I don't want to wait until June 2024.
That is not on there, but if collectively we think that makes sense, but is this something that's negotiable at this point? Like, are we gonna move that?
Well, the options are, not this coming June. I mean, that we couldn't even.
November.
This November is a terrible election. There's nothing on the ballot except referendum questions. So this is an election that typically draws maybe 30%, because people don't see candidates on the ballot, and that's when candidates draw them to the polls. This would draw them in, but not as successfully as a primary would.
And how much would it cost to hold a special referendum?
$3,000 to $5,000. We've done that once before with the Performing Arts Center. We did it on a special election. I think we had 15% turnout, or something really abysmal. It was definitely less than 30%. We can look that number up and get you an accurate number, but it was very small.
Thanks. What about primaries in March of 2024?
Sometimes they're okay. This one will probably be okay coming up because it's presidential, and that'll be more exciting. I think our communities basically love November elections. They really do. I mean, they truly, in both communities, Diane can attest to it, it's crazy. So people love to vote in November. June, if it's contentious, this will be contentious, will bring out over 50%, but presidential elections bring out 70. Last one we had 81%, so it was huge.
I think part of, we talked about this before, but it's very hard to know why people voted no until we have the survey results. We really don't know. But one thing that we do know is solid information is that 4 other public projects in the area failed, and that's unprecedented. So I think it's not unreasonable to think that the underlying fiscal atmosphere in the country is part of the issue. People were not feeling confident and willing to invest. I feel fairly comfortable saying that. And so the only thing that likely is to improve that is time. And so I think it is important to wait a certain amount of time before you go back. Also, certain folks that voted no are not going to find it reasonable to go right back out with the same exact project in such a short period of time, and that's not going to sit well with a lot of folks. So I think time heals a bit of this. I think that's important.
I think one thing to also think about with November versus June is that we're in a pretty politicized period, right? And national politics as well. And so, and a lot of that during presidential elections comes to a head on social media. And so if people are already kind of amped up and spending a lot of time on there, it's like the nastiness just gets compounded. And so it might be better to kind of move away from that type of environment, and in kind of the June period where you have, it's just not going to be conflated as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It also aligns with the school year. So as far as rolling out your communication plan and your engagement, it overlaps with the school year, and people aren't checked out during the summer. So I'm happy to hear from others, but I think it aligns well. Okay. Other stuff on new school. We're supposed to talk about other collaborative efforts, but we've talked about a lot of that mixed in here. Are there other things on either of those topics before we move to public comment? Okay, so I will open public comment. If there are people that would like to speak, step up, introduce yourself, share.
I'm Sarah Rose from North Yarmouth. I'm very interested to know whether the district has done the research on the community model for preschool. I think it is a big value. Tommy's one of my kids. I think we're missing out on a huge community opportunity. I don't know how to say it. I was on the preschool task force 2 times. I spoke about it early on prior to the community, or before North Yarmouth MSAD 51 started their program. I understand very, very, very clearly the need for the CDS services and for that to be a baseline within the district. And I do not understand why the district cannot entertain our community businesses to look to work as a community, because we keep talking about community and collaboration, to offer preschool within the small businesses in our district. I don't understand. Can anybody address that?
Well, the only thing I will say, Sarah, I mean, this is all contingent upon what the state requires us to do. And obviously the partnership with CDS that we currently have is driving the model that we have right now, and in pre-K, the public pre-K program. So are you referencing the school project, the new school proposed project?
Yeah, so, within this new school, we're setting up 8 to 10 opportunity for 8 to 10 classrooms, which I understand there's obviously a possibility of the state mandating public pre-K. My first day of preschool was the day before 9/11, when I went to Getting Started, put out by the state of Maine for my family child care licensing. I was told that I needed to be accredited because public pre-K was happening. So that's how long the conversation has been happening. But as we're looking at building a new school, as we're looking at a school that we already know is going to be full by the time it's built, we already know where our numbers are going to be. So why aren't we looking at the community model for preschools?
Yep, great question. So in the proposed project, there are 4 rooms that are designated as pre-K, and 2 of them would be the existing program that we have, but move it to a full-day model. And that's something that we've talked about for a long time. And the other 2 were designated only if the state mandates us to have 3-year-olds, and we would do the same model that we have with CDS, hopefully have the same model, where 3-year-olds would come in who have disabilities, and then we would also have the same structure that we've got. If the state does not mandate that of public education, then we would be using those 2 rooms as flex space for any increasing enrollment in the future, or for other purposes. But we really are setting aside right now for the current program 2 rooms. We designated 4, and we even talked to the architects about is that we should be designating them as pre-K, the other 2, pre-K and flex, because we don't know if there's any other additional mandates. We'll be ready for it if it is. And if there isn't, we would be using 2 for pre-K, and it would be taking the same program we've got now, it just making the students, that program for them being a full-day program and not a half-day program. So we'd need 2 rooms instead of 1. That's it.
Did you say 3 years old?
Mm-hmm.
Only if
Widgets.
only if the
Widgets,
state.
back to widgets.
And Bob, only if the state. I'm going to say this really clearly. Only if the state requires us to service the students with disabilities, as we're doing right now. We have a model with CDS, and it works well. We would have that as an option
For 3-year-olds.
for 3-year-olds. Now, I don't want 3-year-olds in our schools. Okay, and I'm going to say this. I've said this publicly. I don't think that's a good idea.
No.
But if it only makes sense to do it down the road, we wanted to make sure it was available. I would prefer not to. And we've always said we would like to look at our other options, which are working with our facilities and small businesses already in our community. That's what I'd rather do. So right now, out of the 4 rooms that were designated by the architects, we really only have plans for 2 out of the 4. And the other 2 we would, at this point, use as flex rooms. So there was never any expansion of this program that we're looking for.
And our pre-K enrollment's 36, and it's expected
32.
32, and it'll remain at that level.
30. That's how we would. That's what we're planning for. 32 going into the new building, but except at full day. That would be it.
So you're saying that we're only doing 2 new classrooms, and Sarah was thinking that we're doing 8 to 10. Is that what I'm hearing? The difference?
Yes, that's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
It's hard to compete with a free program.
Yeah.
So our towns have lost 4, 6, 8 veteran childcare providers. A lot of opportunities within our town have been lost. And if we were working with a community model, a child would be able to come to my location. We would have an agreed upon program, i.e. the creative curriculum, which is accepted. There are towns within our state that are doing this. So it's not even, we're not pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Why not work within the system that we have and collaborate at the baseline? That's all I'm saying.
So Jeff, to what degree are we going above and beyond what the state requires of us and then potentially competing with local businesses?
So when the program that we currently have, I mean, we can do this all through private providers, and which was the old model where CDS worked with private providers for 4-year-olds. So when the board set this as a goal years ago and we implemented the pre-K program, we're providing those services for students with disabilities within our school, but we can't just have a program for students with disabilities. We have to have students that are typically performing as well within the same program, obviously. And so we have 32 students. We've had 32 students since the very beginning, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, when we started, and we have no plans to expand this at all. And I've said that many times that, that's never been our plan. We're not planning to do that. The only reason we have this model is because of CDS working with us and partnering with us. And it is really working the way we've designed it, but it is not for all students. And we wouldn't want it to be for all students. We think that most pre-K students should be in a private program and not in our school program. So I agree with Sarah on that, and I agree with others on that who have brought that point up, and we're not looking to expand it at all. The only piece that came up was the 3-year-old piece, Would that be a replicated model if it was mandated that way and it was an opportunity for us to work with CDS? I've said that I'm not in favor of that, but we put that into the plan with the school project. If down the road that was what the community wanted to do, that would be an option. And so we designated 4 rooms. And I asked the architects, take 2 of those rooms and make sure you put flex space on them, because I don't want people thinking that we're trying to expand our existing pre-K program to 4 rooms beyond what it is, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're just, the 2 rooms is all we had an interest in, was full-day program for 32 kids. That's it.
And then what is the ratio, is there a ratio that you need to stay within for?
16. You have to have 16 students or less in a pre-K, public pre-K classroom.
What I was gonna say is, the children with disabilities versus others, like.
You're not supposed to go over 50%. It's supposed to be 50%. It's supposed to be roughly half. It depends on staffing. We have several staff in that program, that work in that program. Much of the funding that we get is from CDS directly. We get reimbursed for costs.
But those, the children with disabilities, that could be done under the community model?
Yes, we don't have to have the model that we have. We could do that in the community, which is what was occurring years ago in this community. You know, the board years ago opted as part of the strategic plan to have a limited program within in our school, so that we could provide those services within our building.
I appreciate the question, Sarah. I know this topic is also near and dear to Tara Williams, and you know, I think potentially a comprehensive presentation with the pros and the cons would be warranted, and but I think we're not looking to expand, which is, you know, good information for you to know. We're certainly not doing 8 to 10 classrooms. So, okay, other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will close it. Anything else from the boards? Okay, so without objection, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you for being here, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, you can have it. 25 minutes.